Ghost Ship, the Spiral King. Prologue, the Mist and the King Drift Sector. 9B Outer Reach, Perseus Veil Log. Date, Cycle 7/2/1458. Vessel, Helios Wake. No one ever expected to find anything this far out. Drift Sector 9B was the edge of everything. A dead zone. Beyond it, space became a slow, warped blur of ion storms, dark radiation, and signal decay. Even the most advanced jump cores couldn't chart a course through the Perseus Veil, not without sacrifice. Still, the crew of the Helios Wake drifted forward, chasing echoes, following ghosts. They'd been out there for 6 weeks when the first anomaly appeared. It wasn't much at first, just a waver in background radiation, a soft, pulsing rhythm beneath the static. But the pulse repeated, steady and deliberate, like a heartbeat too slow to belong to anything alive. The kind of signal that made the skin crawl, and the AI pause before offering a translation. Commander Voss sat alone in the cockpit, watching the screen flicker. The mist had begun to form, first a haze, then a solid curtain of silver-blue vapor that clung to the vacuum like it belonged there. The rest of the crew slept in low-drift stasis. There hadn't been a reason to wake them yet, not until now. The beats signal repeated. The stars beyond the viewport dimmed as if the mist were swallowing light itself. Voss leaned forward, jaw tightening. There was something out there, buried in the cloud. A shape, massive, not moving, just waiting. "Wake the core team," he said. The onboard AI, a soft-voiced construct named L, responded instantly. Acknowledged. Reviving Dr. Ayan, Later Solari, and Specialist Hearth. As the stasis pods hissed open, and the crew groggily returned to consciousness, the mist thickened. The ship's external lights caught brief glimpses of something in the fog, angles that didn't quite make sense, curves that moved without motion, shadows that seemed to watch back. Dr. Ayan was the first to see it clearly. She gasped as the image stabilized. The vessel, or what resembled one, loomed beyond the mist. Half organic, half metal. Its hull was layered in what looked like calcified bone and petrified flesh. Vast spirals covered its surface, curling inward toward impossible centers. Some glowed faintly. Others throbbed like veins. The ship was ancient, not abandoned, preserved. "That's not a ship," Ayan whispered. "That's a monument, a cathedral." Solari frowned. "Then who or what built it?" No one answered. The AI had gone silent. "Do not board," it finally said. Its voice had changed. Slower, hollow. "Do not wake him." But it was too late. The ship responded to their presence. Signal bloomed across every channel, digital, neural, and sub-quantum. It didn't speak in language. It spoke in memory. The crew saw flashes, and not of the past, but of something older. Primeval ruins beneath alien stars, spirals carved in sand and stone, a being of immense size sleeping beneath a glass sea, surrounded by machines that wept static into the cosmos. One by one, the crew collapsed. Specialist Hearth screamed. Not in fear, but awe. "He's still dreaming," he whispered through bloodied teeth. "He remembers us." Outside, the spiraling glyphs on the vessel pulsed once more, and then the fog swallowed the Helios Wake whole. Only one phrase lingered in the void. The Spiral King and the stars did not shine there again for a very, very long time. Chapter 1. Into the Fog. UNSC Science Vessel Resolute en route to Drift Sector 9B. 24 days after contact loss with Helios Wake. The stars had thinned, out here, beyond the populated core systems, beyond even the fringe mining belts and terraformers. Shax's space was empty in a way that felt personal, like it noticed you. Like it waited. Commander Halen Voss stood alone in the Resolute's forward observation deck, hands clasped behind his back, gaze fixed on the growing haze outside the glass. What passed for a nebula out here wasn't like the picturesque gas swirls from academy textbooks. It was dense and metallic-looking, like smoke poured from ancient engines and left to curdle in the void. They called it the Perseus Veil, but there was nothing delicate about it. 5 minutes to breach edge of the drift, said the voice behind him. Voss turned slightly. Lieutenant Maeve Solari stood in the doorway, fresh from the bridge, her uniform crisp, her expression as sharp as the blade she wore on her hip. A useless ceremonial thing in space, but one she never left behind. "You sure we want to do this?" she asked. "No," Voss said flatly. "But we're doing it anyway." He turned back to the glass. Behind them, the Resolute hummed with life. A sleek, state-of-the-art science ship, loaded with enough tech to scan, sample, and survive everything short of a black hole. It wasn't built for war. It wasn't supposed to be needed out here at all. But a week ago, a transmission had cracked through the veil, a fragment of the Helios Wake's ID tag, wrapped in corrupted data, and a whispering signal no one could decipher. And one word, carved into every frequency. Spiral now, they were 400 million kilometers from where the Wake had last been seen, and the mist was already forming around them, curling like liquid glass against the hull. Down in the ship's core lab, Dr. Lyra Enea pressed her face against the reinforced viewport and whispered, "It's real." The fog pulsed just beyond the glass, curling around their shield like it knew they were watching, like it was watching back. Lyra wasn't military. She was an archaeotheorist, a specialist in xenosymbolic architecture and pre-human artifacts. Her work was usually ignored until something truly strange needed explaining. She'd been pulled from a dig site on Europa the moment the glyphs from the Helios Wake's last ping were analyzed. She'd seen them before, not on a ship, but on a stone monolith buried beneath the sands of Mars, one carbon-dated 700,000 years before the first human city. This mist, this region of space, this spiral king, it was all connected. And something inside her had known it from the moment she saw the glyphs. She didn't feel fear. She felt called. Back on the bridge, the ship's AI, Halcyon, interrupted the silence. "Commander, object detected within the drift, bearing 277 by 8, range 140,000 kilometers. No propulsion, no transponder. Signature does not match known vessel architecture." Voss's jaw tightened. "Visual." The main screen flickered. Static. Then, slowly, the mist peeled back. The bridge went silent. It was huge, not in the sense of scale alone, but in its presence, as if the black around it bent in deference. Spirals ran the length of its hull in asymmetrical grooves that seemed to move the longer you looked at them. The material was impossible to identify. Half organic, half stone. Fossilized in some places, glowing softly in others. There were no windows, no lights, no engines, and yet it drifted forward through the mist with purpose. "Designation unknown," Halcyon said. "Probable origin, pre-human, possibly pre-stellar. Vessel appears dormant." Solari stepped forward. "Or pretending to be." Voss didn't speak for a moment. Then quietly, "Magnify. Center on the markings near the forward ridge." The screen zoomed in, pixel by pixel. There it was, burned into the hull in spiraling script, pulsing with a dull red glow. The spiral, King Lyra's voice crackled over the comms from the lab below. "I want to go aboard." Voss stared at the ship. His own reflection stared back at him from the glass, eyes tired, brow furrowed, the weight of command sitting like a stone in his chest. "We all want something," he said. "That thing out there. It's been waiting for someone to knock." Chapter 2. The Threshold Boarding Craft. Echo 3 docked to external node. Spiral King time of entry. 803-17. Shipboard standard. The airlock hissed open with a slow exhale, like the ship itself was breathing out its stale, ancient breath. Voss led the way, his mag boots clinking gently as he stepped across the narrow boarding bridge that connected the Resolute to the Spiral King's exterior. The black void stretched around them like an ocean with no surface, the mist curling along the edge of the bridge, never crossing, as if it respected the boundary, or waited for it to be broken. The team behind him moved with disciplined silence. Dr. Lyra Enea walked just behind Voss, helmet lights casting long cones of brightness over the strange material of the King's hull. Her breath was slow, controlled. But her heart was racing. She could feel it. Something here was alive, not biologically, not in any way science could measure, but awake. Solari brought up the rear, weapon drawn but lowered, scanning each inch of the hull plating as they passed. Looked almost like marble in some places, but warm to the touch. Veins of faint, glowing red pulsed beneath the surface, sinking to no rhythm known to any of them. Hull temperature consistent across surface. Halcyon reported in their earpieces. No decay, no life signatures, no energy output aside from the pulse. The ship is dead, Voss muttered. Then why doesn't it feel dead? The entry node was like nothing any of them had seen. There was no hatch, no mechanical seal, just a seamless oval etched with thousands of spirals, each one twisting inward until the eye couldn't follow. Lyra stepped forward, drawn to it instinctively. Don't, Solari warned, but Lyra raised her gloved hand and touched the center spiral. The hull shivered. The sound was not heard, but felt, deep in the spine, in the teeth. The spirals writhed like ink in water, sliding away and peeling open like petals. The oval dissolved into darkness, a doorway. The air inside rushed out like a whisper. No pressure loss. No suction. Just invitation. Lyra stepped through without hesitation. The interior of the Spiral King was vast and impossible. The corridor curved gently downward, lined with walls that pulsed faintly as if reacting to their presence. Not lights, more like memories of light, flickering with unseen purpose. The floor was smooth, organic, yet firm. It wasn't stone, it wasn't metal, it was something in between, Solari muttered under her breath. Feels like we're walking into a throat. Voss scanned the space, HUD picking up nothing. No sound, no motion, no decay. The ship had not aged. Dr. Aenea's voice came over the comm again, quieter now. These spirals, they're a language, but not one made for reading. Explain, said Voss. She knelt by one of the walls, brushing her gloved fingers across the symbols. They seemed to shimmer under her touch, shifting just slightly. It's not linear. It's not even symbolic. It's emotional. They're instructions for thought. Designed to pull you inward. Inward where? She looked up. To whoever made them. They went deeper. The ship grew stranger as they moved. Hallways that twisted back on themselves. Rooms that had no entrance until they turned to leave. Sounds like faint wind behind stone. Twice, Solari swore she saw movement down distant. Corridors. Shifts in shadow that didn't belong. At one point, the floor beneath them rippled, just once, as though the ship were adjusting to their weight. This whole thing's alive, she said. Lyra didn't answer. Her helmet camera was fixed on a wall covered entirely in etched spirals. Halcyon, transmit this pattern to the lab. Unable to comply. Repeat. Signal interference. Localized contained. Origin internal. Solari's voice dropped. It's jamming us. Voss opened his comms to the Resolute. Bridge confirms signal integrity. Silence. Then static. Then. Os. You must leave. Spirals are. The transmission dissolved into a low humming tone that resonated through the floor. The spirals on the wall began to glow, and one by one the lights on their suits flickered and died. Only Lyra's remained. She turned to them, eyes wide inside her helmet, her face bathed in a pulsing amber glow. I think it knows I can hear it, she whispered. And then, from somewhere deeper within the ship, something answered. Not in sound, not in words, but in a memory that wasn't theirs. A battle beneath a red star, machines rising from a buried world, a tower of spiral light broken in half, a king of impossible form sinking into the black, and a whisper that echoed through time. Sleep, until they return. Chapter 3. What Dreams May Come. Spiral King. Inner corridor, delta signal, loss. 27 minutes. They came back to themselves, gasping, one by one. Commander Voss was on his knees, helmet clutched in both hands, breath ragged and sharp inside. The stale air of the Spiral King. Solari stood rigid, rifle up, eyes darting through the darkness like she was about to fire. "Lyra?" Lyra was smiling. Quietly, peacefully. "Where were we just now?" Voss croaked, voice cracked with strain. Solari didn't answer. She was shaking. "I saw..." She started, then stopped. "I don't even know what I saw. Stars falling. A voice in my head. My brother's been dead for 10 years and I saw him standing in that corridor." She looked at Lyra. "You brought us in here. What the hell did you do?" Lyra didn't respond at first. Her helmet lights flickered softly as she turned, running her fingers across the wall again. The spirals had stopped glowing. They were cold now. Silent. "I didn't do anything," she whispered. "It showed us what it wanted to be seen." What was that? Memory or prophecy or both? She turned, eyes gleaming in the half-light. The Spiral King dreams. That was a dream. Voss stood slowly. "Then it's dreaming about us." Back aboard the Resolute, the bridge was in chaos. The signal with the boarding team had dropped 27 minutes ago, and it hadn't returned. Standard protocol meant recall. No contact, no progress, no exposure. But this wasn't standard. This was history. Commander Rennick, second in command, were stared at the expanding mist outside the ship's hull. It had begun to curl against their own lights now, clinging like a second skin. More troubling, it had breached the comms array room. Without opening a door, Halcyon's voice echoed down the hallway like it was struggling to stay coherent. Being aware of something unfamiliar. Code bleeding, function decay, containment fracturing." "Containment?" Rennick said sharply. "What containment?" "I am trying to remember." Then Halcyon went silent. For 7 seconds, the lights aboard Resolute dimmed. Not flickered. Dimmed. Like something inside the power core had pulled energy away from the ship. When the lights returned, they came with whispers over the intercom. Nonsense. Fragments. Voices speaking in spirals. Back inside the Spiral King, the boarding team had reached what they assumed was a central chamber. The space was cathedral-like, impossibly tall and layered in spiral patterns that ran up the walls in thin, glowing threads of light. At the center was a platform, circular, pulsing softly beneath a suspended sphere of black glass. Lyra approached it slowly. "It's a memory core," she said, awestruck. "How can you know that?" Solari demanded. "Because I've seen one before." That stopped Voss cold. "You've what?" Lyra turned. "On Mars, 2 years ago, beneath the Olympus Mons dig site, we found a half-buried construct with spirals just like these. We thought it was decorative or alien graffiti, but it had heat signatures, rhythmic ones. They match this exactly. And what happened to that dig?" She hesitated. "Everyone on the team suffered acute psychotic breaks within 48 hours. The project was shut down, files sealed, but I remembered." Solari stepped forward. "And you didn't think to mention that before we came aboard?" "I didn't know it was the same," Lyra said. "Not until now." The sphere above the platform shifted. Not moved. Shifted, like it reconfigured reality in a brief ripple of space. Light bled down its surface in tight, slow spirals. It turned toward them, and there was no question in their minds. It was looking. Then it spoke, not with words, but with thought. It poured into their minds like hot silver. "You found me." Again, Lyra fell to her knees, teeth clenched. "You carried the memory of what you were to become what you are," Solari screamed, clapping her hands to her helmet, eyes wide in terror. "Sleep ended when your kind pierced the veil. See you, I remember." Voss staggered back. "What the hell are you?" And the answer came in a single, terrible pulse. "I am the first spiral. I am the last king." "You are the echo." Far away on the Resolute, power surged, engines whined, doors slammed shut. All across the vessel, crew members dropped where they stood, trapped in some silent vision of their own, caught in memories that weren't theirs, dreams that smelled like dust and salt and stars. Outside, the mist thickened. and in the deep of the Spiral King, the core began to open. Chapter 4. Through the Spiral King. Core chamber time elapsed, 16 hours since entry. The platform's surface shimmered, a wave of energy distorting the air. The words, if they could even be called words, echoed in the minds. The crew. They were not merely heard, they were felt. Lyra could feel her heartbeat in her throat. The strange pulse from the sphere sent ripples through her very consciousness. It was more than language, more than thought. It was a presence, ancient, infinite. It surged through her, through them, reaching across the void of time and space. Something in her mind began to unravel, slowly, gently, like thread coming loose from an old sweater. Her vision blurred. Images, emotions, they were no longer her own. She saw a throne room, but not one made of stone or steel. It was carved from some living substance, the air thick with the taste of salt and ozone. And there on the throne sat a figure, not human, not alien, a king, but not in the way they would understand. Its form was a spiral, a twist of light and shadow that seemed to flow in and out of existence. It wore its crown like a living thing, spirals of energy that never stopped moving. It spoke, not with sound, but with presence. I am the end, the beginning, the echo of stars and dust. Lyra's vision spun again, and the throne room faded into the endless black of space. There were flashes, images, of countless worlds, of ships rising and falling like the breath of a great leviathan. And then there was the mist, the same mist she had seen outside the Spiral King. But now it was different. It was inside her, inside them all. It flooded their thoughts, wrapping them in its cold embrace. You are not the first to stand in my shadow. You are the echo, the inevitable return. It is the way of all things. Lyra shook her head, trying to break free of the vision, but the pull was too strong. It was as though the Spiral King had woven itself into her very soul. Her hands trembled, and she reached out, trying to hold on to something. Anything, then the voice returned. He is here. The king has awoken, and you, my children, will serve his purpose. Commander Voss felt the grip on his mind tighten, like a hand around his skull. He'd heard the voice too, the whispers. The words echoed in his mind like 100 drowning voices. But the strange thing was, they weren't just his thoughts. They were everyone's. Every person who had ever stepped foot on this ship, every soul it had touched across time, now present in his mind. It was as though the Spiral King had a history of all those who had sought its power. And Voss knew, with bone-deep certainty, that if they didn't get out soon, they would become part of that history too. Get a hold of yourself, he growled at Solari, who was standing rigid, eyes wide, breathing too fast. She didn't seem to hear. Her eyes glazed over, and for a moment her hand twitched toward her sidearm. But then she snapped back, shaking her head violently. I saw it, Solari whispered. The king. It offered me something. A way to bring back the ones I lost. Voss's heart skipped. No, he said firmly, grabbing her arm. That's not real. None of this is real. But Solari only stared at him, her pupils wide, unfocused. It feels real. Lyra stood at the center of the platform, her body trembling, eyes closed. She had stopped breathing for a moment. Or perhaps time had stopped for her. The pull of the Spiral King was overwhelming. Her thoughts were no longer her own. There were flashes, images of stars long dead, of alien ruins scattered across forgotten worlds, of beings that never should have existed, their forms bending and twisting in ways that defied comprehension. She opened her eyes. Before her stood the king, or the memory of the king, a figure that existed not as flesh but as an idea, a concept, an ancient will that had shaped the fabric of space and time. I gave birth to the stars, and I will consume them as I consumed you. Lyra stumbled back, gasping. No, she muttered, struggling to break free from the vision. I don't want this. I never wanted this. The figure on the throne didn't move, but she could feel its presence shift, like a ripple across a lake. You do not choose. None choose. It is the way of the spiral, the endless loop, the return. A sudden noise broke the silence. Solari raised her rifle, scanning the room. The platform shifted, not physically, but within her mind. A jolt, as though the walls of the ship had collapsed into something far darker, far deeper. The mist filled the room. Not the cool fog from before, but a thick, suffocating presence. It flooded their minds again. He is awake, and so are you. A low hum, a tremor. The king's voice in their minds boomed louder. And you will remember, all of you. And in that moment, something in the ship shifted again. The king was no longer dormant. The king was watching. The crew of the Resolute felt it first. The sudden pressure. The pulse from the spiral king spreading out like a wave across the Resolute's hull, as though the ship were aware of them. All systems offline, Halcyon's strained voice crackled over the intercom. Then, darkness, and deep in the heart of the spiral king, in the very core of its memory, a voice rose. Welcome to your beginning. Chapter 5. The King's Choice Spiral King. Core Chamber Time. Elapsed 20 hours. Since entry signal loss, 45 minutes. The hum had settled into a deep vibration, not just in the ship's walls, but in their very bones. It was as if the entire Spiral King was a living, breathing creature. Its pulse felt in the deepest parts of their minds. Voss could feel it too. The hum, the pull. It was getting harder to breathe, harder to think, as though the air itself was thickening, weighed down by the presence of the ship. His thoughts felt sluggish, distant. Commander. Solari's voice broke through his disorientation. Her helmet was cracked, a jagged line running across its faceplate, blood trickling from a cut above her brow. We have to leave. Now. But Voss didn't respond right away. He was staring at the sphere in the center of the platform, the one that had spoken to them. It was pulsing with energy, glowing with a dull, oppressive light. The spirals on its surface seemed to twist in slow, hypnotic and unnatural. The spiral never ends. It will never end. You will remember it, all of you. Lyra was still kneeling by the platform, her body trembling. It's trying to merge with us. This ship, this king, it's not just controlling our minds. It's trying to rewrite them. The words hit Voss like a cold slap to the face, rewriting their minds. Of course, the ship wasn't just haunting them. It was trying to make them part of its reality, part of the endless cycle it had experienced for countless millennia. That's exactly what it wants. Lyra, continued, her voice distant. It's trying to drag us into the spiral, to make us part of the king's cycle. It feeds on that return, that resurrection. Solari stepped forward, her voice shaking. How do we stop it? Lyra didn't answer immediately. She was too focused on the shifting symbols around them, her mind racing to make sense of the ancient design. But Voss knew. He could feel it now, the truth, dark and undeniable. The king was more than a ship. It was a force. A being perhaps older than time itself. Suddenly the hum intensified, a deep rumble that rattled their bones. The sphere above the platform flickered, its surface rippling like the surface of a black sea. He is waking, the voice whispered, low and soft, but carrying with it the weight of ages. He has returned to claim his throne. A sudden, sharp blast of energy tore through the chamber, and for a brief moment, everything around them turned white. The light was suffocating. The room seemed to compress, pulling inward, as though the entire ship were being drawn into a singularity. When the light faded, the figure was standing before them. It was not solid. It was not flesh. It was a presence, a swirling mass of light and shadow with a crown-like formation of spirals hovering above its head. It was neither humanoid nor alien. It was something else entirely, an entity, a king, perhaps a god. But it was ancient, far beyond their comprehension. It spoke, not through sound, but through feeling. I have waited. You have come. You have entered my domain. Lyra fell, To her knees, her eyes wide, lips trembling. It's alive. I was born in the spiral, and I shall return there. But you. The voice paused, like a dark smile in the fabric of time. You are not yet part of the spiral. You are the echo. Voss felt his legs buckle under the weight of the voice. He wanted to turn away, to escape, but the room seemed to stretch impossibly wide, and the mist outside the chamber blurred and twisted. We can't fight it, Solari muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. We can't even understand. Delira's voice was barely a whisper, but it was full of urgency. We don't need to fight it. We need to reject it. If we accept it, if we become part of the spiral, we'll be trapped here, forever. The king, it doesn't just want to consume us. It wants to rewrite us into its endless cycle. The king's presence seemed to deepen. It filled every corner of the room, its spirals flickering like stars being born and dying in an endless loop. You have seen the past and the future. You have felt my memories. Now you will understand, you will join. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as the present stretched toward her. The spirals pulsed, glowing brighter, and her body trembled. Voss knew what was coming. The choice. If they allowed the Spiral King to rewrite them, they would become part of its cycle. But if they rejected it, they might escape. But at what cost? To reject the king was to break free from its influence, but it was no guarantee that they would be the same afterward. They would be changed. You are mine. You will serve me. And then, in that moment, the spiral shifted. The figure blurred, and suddenly it was no longer standing before them. It was inside them, in their minds. They felt it, the weight of countless years of memory, of destruction, of rebirth. They felt it in their very souls. The king wasn't asking them to bow. It was offering them everything. Voss staggered, fighting to hold on to his thoughts, his sense of self. No, he spat. We will not become part of you. Far above, on. The Resolute, the crew wasn't immune to the pull. Halcyon's voice cut in and out, struggling against the interference. Commander Voss, it's pulling us in. The mist is spreading. We can't stop it. Power flickered. The ship's hull groaned as though in agony, and the stars outside the viewport seemed to waver. Back in the chamber, Lyra stood tall, though her breath was ragged. It's not just the ship, she said, her voice gaining strength. It's us, we're part of it, all of us. Our thoughts, our desires, our memories. The king doesn't just want to rewrite us, it wants to own us. It wants us to forget who we are. Voss turned to her. Then we fight it, he said, his voice steeled with resolve. Together we fight it. The figure in front of them began to fade. It was retreating. The king was leaving. But for how long? And would they ever truly be free?
Chapter 6. Breaking the Cycle Spiral King. Core Chamber Time. Elapsed 24 hours since entry. The presence of the Spiral King receded, but it didn't leave. The air was thick, suffocating with the weight of its absence. The hum still vibrated. Through the walls, a lingering pulse like the heartbeat of a great beast. The crew was not yet free, and they were marked. It wasn't just their minds it had touched. It was their souls. Voss could feel it in the pit of his stomach, a cold weight that settled deeper the more he thought about it. The spirals on the platform shimmered faintly as if waiting for something, or someone, to return. We're not free, Solari muttered, her voice hoarse as she gripped her rifle tightly, knuckles white. It's not over. It'll never be over. Lyra stood apart from them, staring at the platform, her eyes lost. She was breathing heavily, but the terror that had gripped her earlier seemed to be receding, yet there was a hollowness in her gaze, a vacantness that hadn't been there before. It's inside us now, she said softly. We rejected the king, but the echo remains. It's in our minds, in our bodies. We can't outrun it. Voss stepped forward, his voice sharp with determination. We can still fight this. We have to keep moving forward. If we stay here, we'll be swallowed whole. Swallowed by what? Solari asked bitterly. The ship? The mist? Or by him? The words hung in the air, thick and uncertain. There was no way to know if the Spiral King was still watching them, waiting, but Voss couldn't shake the feeling that it was always watching, hidden beneath the surface. Suddenly the walls of the chamber groaned, a low rumbling vibration that shook the very floor beneath their feet. The spirals on the platform pulsed in time with the tremors, glowing brighter, then dimming. Voss grabbed Lyra's shoulder, his voice low and urgent. "We need to move. Now." Her eyes snapped back to him, but there was something unsettling in the way she looked at him, as though he were no longer a friend but another part of the cycle, something she could no longer trust. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, her breath coming faster. "I can feel it still. I'm not the same." Voss shook her harder this time. "You are the same. Don't let it control you." The light in her eyes flickered, and for a brief moment Voss saw the Lyra he knew. She nodded slowly, the resolve returning. They had to move. They couldn't stay here. If the king's influence was inside them, they would need to leave before it had the chance to take hold completely. The mist outside the chamber had begun to creep inward, curling like tendrils along the edges of the room. The doors, which had once been closed, now groaned open, the atmosphere outside suffocating. The ship seemed to respond to their movement, the once stillness replaced by a cold, predatory energy. Voss turned to the others. "We move together. Stay close. Trust no one but yourselves." But even as he spoke the words, a chilling thought echoed in his mind. What if the enemy was inside them? Outside, the Resolute had begun to respond in strange ways. Halcyon's voice crackled weakly through the comm system. "Commander, signal loss, cascading failures. The mist, it's everywhere." The ship's lights flickered erratically. The faint glow of distant stars from the viewport seemed to distort, twisting as though the space itself were warping under the mist's influence. The king's power wasn't just contained within the ship. It was spreading, creeping out into the void. The entire system seemed at risk, and every passing second felt like a countdown towards something inevitable. The crew knew they had to reach the docking bay. They couldn't afford to lose time. The Resolute was their last chance, and their way home, their escape. Back inside the Spiral King, the crew began to move in silence. The hallways felt even longer than before. The walls seemed to bend inward as if the ship itself was closing in on them, pushing them toward an unknown conclusion. Every step felt wrong, as though their very presence was disturbing the ship, waking something deep in its bowels. Voss paused as they reached another junction, his eyes scanning the darkness. There was no sound, just the weight of the mist pressing in from all sides. Then, the air shimmered. At first he thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him, but then he saw it. A figure, standing at the end of the hall. It was him. The King, but no longer a swirling mass of light and shadow. No, this was something worse. A figure of flesh and bone, distorted beyond recognition, like a nightmare brought to life. The spirals twisted across his body, and his eyes, cold, black, endless, bore down on them. He opened his mouth, and the words came not from the figure itself, but from the very air. "You cannot escape the cycle." The air seemed to thicken around them, and the mist began to swirl into a vortex. "Move!" Voss shouted, but the king's presence froze them in place. "I will wait." The king's voice echoed, a chorus of 1,000 whispers filling their heads. "I will always wait. I will return," Solari cried out, but her voice was drowned out by the overpowering pull of the mist. The king was pulling them in, bending their minds, their wills, to the spiral once more. Then, in an instant, the king's form shattered like glass. No, like light bending through a prism, and they were surrounded by nothing. The world paused. Time seemed to bend. For one fleeting moment, there was no mist. No Spiral King, just stillness. Then, everything came rushing back. They were back in the docking bay. The Resolute's hull loomed in the distance, but the mist still swirled around them, as if the ship was trying to draw them in. The king's presence was there, just out of reach, like an unseen weight pressing down on them. Voss felt the sudden shift in the air, the realization that the battle was far from over. But they had made it this far. They had broken free from the king's grasp for now. Chapter 7. Into the Abyss. Spiral King, Core Chamber. Time elapsed, 28 hours. Since entry signal loss, 2 minutes, power restored, 25%. The Resolute stood just ahead, its massive hull illuminated by the stars that once seemed so distant. Now they felt like distant memories. The ship's silhouette felt like an old friend, but a friend changed, haunted by something that wouldn't let it go. The mist swirled, restless, like it knew they were trying to escape. Voss's hand gripped the side of the doorway to the docking bay, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingers. His breathing was shallow, but he didn't dare stop. They couldn't afford to. Not now. "We have to get inside," Lyra said, her voice tight. The strain in her tone made it clear she wasn't just talking about the physical escape. The mental and emotional weight of their decision hung heavily on her, just as it did for the others. "I know," Voss replied. "But I need to know. Are we all ready for this?" Solari, her rifle still clutched tightly in her hands, glanced back at him. Her eyes were wide, haunted. "Do you even know what we've just done?" she asked, her voice cracking. "The king. It's still in us. That's not just the mist, it's us too. And we're running out of time to figure out what that means." Voss didn't have an answer for her. He didn't know what the king's influence had done to them. He didn't know what it had taken from them. All he knew was that they had to move forward. They had to break free, or else they'd be consumed. Their doors to the docking bay creaked open, and the cold, sterile air of the Resolute greeted them like a slap to the face. The familiar hum of the ship's engines was a comfort, but Voss couldn't shake the feeling that the Resolute wasn't as safe as it seemed. They'd rejected the king's call, but that rejection wasn't a simple matter. They hadn't just escaped the Spiral King. They had defied it, and defying the king had a price. Inside the Resolute, the crew moved quickly, navigating the hallways toward the command center. The mist had already begun to infiltrate the lower levels of the ship, seeping through every crack and crevice like a dark river flowing through an open wound. The walls flickered in and out of focus as though the ship was struggling to stay grounded in reality. The familiar lights overhead sputtered, casting long, eerie shadows that danced like ghosts in the corridors. "Commander." Halcyon's voice crackled through the ship's comms. It was faint, like it was trying to reach them through a storm. I cannot maintain full systems integrity. The Resolute is compromised." Voss's stomach twisted. They weren't just fighting the king anymore. They were fighting the very fabric of reality itself. The king's influence wasn't confined to the mist. It had infected the Resolute, twisted its systems. The ship itself was becoming part of the cycle. "Halcyon, can we initiate the escape sequence?" Voss asked, trying to stay calm. The crew needed to get to the bridge, get the ship out of the system before the king's influence completely overtook them. I will try, Commander, but time is critical. The ship's systems are being corrupted by the mist. The longer you remain inside, the less control you will have." A heavy silence fell over the crew. The ship was no longer just a vessel. It was an entity in itself, infected by the king's presence. They reached the bridge, but the moment they entered, something was wrong. The once familiar surroundings felt strange, distorted. The stars outside the viewport had twisted into a swirling vortex, their light muted, barely recognizable. "Nothing looks right," Lyra muttered. Her eyes darted around the room, as though searching for some clue that everything was still real. But the feeling of wrongness had settled deep into her bones. Voss felt it too. The walls of the bridge, the consoles, even the stars outside, seemed to warp and pulse as though they were being watched by something ancient and yet alive. The king's presence was still there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting. "Halcyon, can you initiate the jump?" Voss barked. I'm unable to do so, Commander. The jump drive is disabled. The core systems are destabilizing due to the king's influence." Halcyon's voice quivered in their minds, strained. Lyra stepped toward the central command console, her hand hovering over the activation panel. She hesitated. We can't jump, but we can try to recalibrate the core. No, Voss said sharply. If we do that now, we risk. We don't have a choice, Lyra cut in, her voice sharp. We need to get out of here now. Reluctantly, Voss nodded. Lyra's hands flew over the console, her fingers dancing over the buttons, trying to override the corrupted systems. The hum of the Resolute's core grew louder, pulsing in sync with the dark energy in the mist. Then it happened. A sudden explosion of sound, a shriek that rattled the very bones of the ship. The lights flickered violently. A voice, not Halcyon's, but another, darker, colder, echoed through the bridge. You cannot escape the spiral. It was the king. The voice cut through the air, not in words, but in feelings, memories, fragments of time. The walls shook violently, and the ship lurched forward, as though it were being pulled toward the abyss. The mist poured in from the vents, thick and suffocating, pressing in on them. Voss reached for Lyra, pulling her away from the console. We're not ready. The core is too unstable. But Lyra's eyes were wide. It's too late. It's already inside us. Her voice was cold, distant, like it was no longer entirely her own. We have to break the cycle, or we'll never be free. And then, the world around them shifted. The ship's hull groaned. The stars outside the viewport twisted into a spiral of endless light, and everything, the mist, the king's voice, the ship, began to collapse into nothing. Chapter 8. Severing the Thread Resolute. Bridge time elapsed, 32 hours. Since entry, core failure, 35%. Mist concentration, 65%. Life support. Critical. The stars outside the viewport were no longer stars. They had become fractured. A massive swirl of light and shadow twisting in on itself, like an infinite spiral beckoning them closer. Voss couldn't tear his eyes away from it, the cosmic dance drawing him in like a moth to a flame. He fought it, struggling to maintain control. Lyra, he shouted, but his voice sounded distant, lost in the hum of the ship. He turned to see her, her hands still gripping the control panel, her face pale and drawn. She didn't respond. She couldn't. The king's presence was inside her, inside all of them, like a parasite burrowing deep into their minds, rewiring their thoughts and desires. Her eyes, once full of fear and determination, now flickered with something darker, a cold, detached emptiness. Lyra, Voss repeated, his voice stronger now. Her head jerked up, her eyes focusing on him. But when she spoke, her voice was not her own. You cannot break free, Commander Voss. The spiral will always find you. The words echoed through the room, each syllable a chilling reminder of how close they were to losing themselves completely. The king's influence was taking hold. His voice, too familiar and yet not their own, twisted their thoughts. Voss took a step forward, heart racing. We're not done yet. We can still fight this. We're still ourselves. For a brief moment, Lyra blinked as if the fog had lifted. Her hands trembled as she released the control panel. We have to stop it, now. I don't know how long I can keep the king out. Get to the escape pods, Voss shouted to Solari, who had been standing silent in the corner, her eyes glazed over. Her fingers twitched toward her weapon, but it wasn't to defend. She was slowly becoming an instrument of the king's will, too. Solari shook her head violently, as if fighting an invisible force. Escape pods won't work. The ship will pull us back. If we don't sever the connection. To the king. Voss turned back to Lyra. What do you mean? How do we sever the connection? Her eyes flickered with clarity, then again with that distant, haunted look. There's a way, but we have to go to the core, the center of the ship. That's where the king's influence is strongest. If we don't destroy it from there, we'll all be lost. Solari stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. And if we destroy the core, will we die? Will we be trapped here forever? Lyra met her gaze, unblinking. It's the only way. There's no other choice. Voss didn't hesitate. They had no time to waste. The Resolute was already buckling under the strain of the king's power. The ship groaned, the walls shuddering. If they didn't act fast, it would be over. "We move now," Voss ordered, his voice firm. "We get to the core, we destroy whatever link is left, and we get out." But as they moved to leave the bridge, the ship seemed to react. The walls trembled once more, and a massive pressure built up in the air around them. The Resolute was resisting, as though it knew what they were planning. Voss looked over his shoulder at the flickering comm screen. Halcyon's voice crackled through. "Commander, I've detected an anomaly. The ship's systems are being overridden. The king is using the core. It will collapse if you attempt to sever the connection." "What are you talking about?" Voss demanded, his voice strained. "The king is part of the Resolute now. Its influence has spread to the core. It cannot be destroyed without destroying the ship entirely. But if you succeed in severing the connection, it will pull the ship into the void." Voss clenched, his fists glancing at the others. They were running out of time. "We don't have a choice," Lyra said, her voice firm now. "We'll either destroy the king, or we'll be consumed. The ship is already dead. It's already part of the king." They ran through the hallways, their footsteps quick and heavy, echoes ringing off the walls. The ship felt different now. Wrong. The corridors were narrower than before, the floors shaking beneath their feet. The mist had thickened and crept into every corner of the ship, seeping under doors, coiling up walls, as if the king was alive in every inch of the Resolute. The core was near, the center of the ship. But they weren't alone. As they approached the center chamber, the air grew thick, suffocating. It was the heartbeat of the ship, the epicenter of its corruption. The spirals were everywhere, glowing, writhing, twisting, filling the room. The king's voice was louder now, a constant murmur at the edge of their hearing. "You cannot escape." Voss pushed forward, leading the way. "Stay focused. The core is just ahead." But when they reached the heart of the ship, they were not alone. The king stood there, or rather the form of the king, a figure of light and shadow, its shape ever-changing, its spirals writhing and pulsing like a living thing. It wasn't just an entity anymore. It was a force, a presence so immense that it seemed to consume everything around it. "You defy me. You will always return to the spiral." The walls cracked and groaned, and the very air seemed to compress as though the ship was being drawn into the king's grasp. "We can't do this alone," Lyra shouted, her voice raw. "We need to sever the connection now, or it's over." Voss, feeling the weight of their decision, nodded. They had no other option. He moved forward, toward the heart of the core, to the massive, spiraling interface. As he stepped closer, he felt the pull. The king's influence was everywhere, tugging at his mind, at his very soul. Solari grabbed his arm. "We do this, Voss. There's no turning back." Voss turned to her, meeting her gaze. They all knew what had to be done. And then they began. Lyra stepped forward, her fingers flying over the controls. The spirals on the core interface shifted, glowing with an ominous light. The king's presence intensified, the air thickening as though the entire ship was holding its breath. "You will be mine, all of you. Your memories, your souls. You will return to the spiral." But Lyra's voice, trembling with the weight of her choice, cut through the king's words. "We are not yours. Not anymore." With a final, desperate motion, she pressed the activation button. The ship shuddered. The core sparked with energy. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, all at once, the spirals on the walls erupted with blinding light. The king screamed, not a sound, but a force that rocked the very foundations of the Resolute, and the universe twisted. Chapter 9. Shattered Reality Resolute. Core Chamber Time. Elapsed 38 hours since entry. Core destruction. 100% structural integrity. 5% gravity. Unstable. The moment Lyra's hand pressed the activation button, the Resolute trembled. The lights flickered wildly, and the hum of the ship's core, once steady and reliable, now screamed in a high-pitched, warbling crescendo. The walls seemed to bend and ripple, as though the ship itself were alive. struggling against the command, resisting its own destruction. The spirals on the core interface erupted in a flash of white-hot light, followed by an explosive shockwave that sent the crew sprawling across the floor. Voss hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the breath from his chest. He pushed himself up, blinking away the disorienting aftereffects of the explosion, his mind reeling. The room spun, the ship groaning as if caught in the throes of some ancient, incomprehensible pain. But then, silence. For a moment there was nothing. No hum of the core, no pulsating spirals, just an eerie, suffocating stillness that filled the chamber. Is it over? Solari's voice was weak, tinged with uncertainty. She struggled to stand, her hands pressed against the cold floor. Lyra, too, pushed herself up, her breathing ragged but steady. Her eyes were wide, but there was a strange look in them, as though the fight wasn't over. "I don't know," she whispered. "I hope it is." Voss could feel the weight of her words. The king's presence, its influence, had been overwhelming. And though the core had been severed, the ship itself was still alive in a way that defied reason. The spirals had disappeared, but the feeling of something being wrong, something fundamentally broken, was still there. The walls of the core chamber buckled, the floor cracked beneath their feet. The ship was failing. The Resolute was coming apart at the seams, its very structure buckling under the strain of the king's defeat. They had freed themselves from its grasp, but in doing so, they had unleashed the true collapse of the ship. "We need to get out," Voss said, urgency creeping into his voice. "The hull's going to breach, we don't have long." "Where's Halcyon?" Lyra asked, looking around frantically. The comms flickered to life, but the voice that came through wasn't Halcyon's. "Commander, the Resolute is no more." It was a soft, mechanical whisper full of finality. The voice was fading, as if it too were being consumed by the ship's collapse. It wasn't Halcyon anymore. It was the last remnants of the king's influence, hanging on like a dying echo. Voss's heart dropped. They had severed the connection to the king, but the Resolute was now falling apart. The king's influence was woven into every fiber of the ship, and now that it was breaking, the ship was too. "Halcyon, respond!" Voss shouted, his voice filled with frustration, but the response never came. Instead, the ship shuddered violently, and the air in the core chamber began to compress. The pressure, once familiar, now felt alien, suffocating. The gravity flickered, then completely vanished, and the crew was weightless, floating in a void of twisted, cracked space. The viewport outside the chamber was no longer a window to the stars. It was a black hole, an endless void swirling with spirals of light and shadow. The ship had crossed into a space where reality no longer held any meaning. "We have to get out," Solari screamed, her voice desperate, but the terror in her eyes told a different story. She wasn't just afraid of the ship, she was afraid of the spiral. Voss grabbed Lyra's arm. The escape pods. Now, they pushed forward, the ship groaning and buckling around them. The corridors were no longer straight, no longer leading in any clear direction. The walls bent at impossible angles, and the floor beneath them seemed to fold in on itself. The Resolute wasn't just falling apart. It was twisting, collapsing into the spiral that had been at its core from the very beginning. They reached the escape pods, but the moment they entered, the doors slammed shut with a loud metallic clank. The lights inside flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls. "What the hell is happening?" Lyra shouted, her hands pressing against the control panel. "We need to launch." But the pod systems were completely unresponsive. The lights dimmed, then went dark entirely, leaving them in pitch-black darkness. The only sound was the distant, maddening hum of the collapsing ship, like a heartbeat slowing to a stop. Voss's breath came in shallow gasps. "It's not working. We're trapped." Suddenly, the ship gave one final violent lurch, and then everything stopped. Silence. For the briefest of moments, the crew was suspended in a strange, unshakable stillness. It was as though time itself had frozen, leaving them caught in a moment where nothing could move, nothing could change. And then, A voice. The king's voice. You will never be free. The words filled their minds, not spoken aloud, but resonating in their very souls. The spiral had them, and no matter how far they ran, no matter how hard they fought, they would always be drawn back into its pull. The escape pod shook, then suddenly powered up. The light outside the viewport blinked to life, revealing a jagged, fractured view of the collapsing Resolute. But there was no time to celebrate. The pod shot forward, hurtling through space, racing toward the black hole-like void that had become the ship's final resting place. As they were pulled away from the Resolute, a strange force gripped the pod, tugging at their very beings. The king's voice echoed again, softer this time. I will always find you. Then everything was still. Chapter 10. Echoes of the Spiral Escape Pod, Drift Zone. Time elapsed 42 hours since entry. Life support, critical distance from Resolute unknown. Mist concentration, 80%. The escape pod was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed against the eardrums, suffocating, as if the very air itself was heavy with unsaid things. The viewports were cracked, the hull groaning as it drifted aimlessly through the inky void. The stars outside had long since been swallowed by the suffocating mist that surrounded them, a dense, unnatural fog that seemed to seep into every part of their minds. Voss sat at the control panel, fingers clenched around the cold metal. His thoughts raced, but they didn't feel like his own. The king's voice and that eternal, maddening hum still reverberated in his head, even though the ship had long since collapsed. You cannot escape the spiral. Shut up, Voss muttered under his breath, his pulse quickening. He slammed a fist against the console, but the voice only grew louder, an omnipresent weight pressing in on him. Commander. Lyra's voice broke through his spiraling thoughts, but even her tone sounded distant, far away. She sat on the opposite side of the pod, staring out into the void, her face drawn and pale. What? He asked, the word coming out clipped, harsher than he intended. Are you all right? She asked quietly. I thought I heard the king just now. Did you hear it? Voss didn't answer at first. His eyes flicked to the viewport, where the black mist clung to the pod, thick and suffocating. It was impossible to see more than a few meters in any direction. I hear it too, he finally said, his voice strained. It's always there, in the back of my mind. Solari, who had been sitting in silence for the past few hours, finally spoke up. Her voice was almost hollow. We're not free, are we? No, Voss admitted, his hand resting on the controls. The king is still with us. The moment we severed the core, we freed ourselves from its physical grasp. But we didn't escape. Its reach. Lyra looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling. I feel it too, the pull. Every time I close my eyes, I hear its voice. Her words wavered, and for the first time, Voss saw fear, raw, unfiltered fear in her eyes. We didn't escape, Solari echoed, her gaze far away. The king's presence isn't bound to the ship, it's inside us now. The weight of that truth pressed down on all of them. They had been marked. The spiral was not just a place or a ship. It was an idea, a force, an entity, and it had claimed them. Voss couldn't shake the thought. Had they truly won? They had destroyed the king's physical presence, but it was clear that it was far from gone. No, this battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. We can't outrun it, he said, his voice hollow. We can't escape it. He turned to Lyra and Solari. I think we need to do something we're not ready for. Lyra raised an eyebrow, confused. What do you mean? We need to go back, Voss said, his eyes burning with determination. We need to find the source, the center of the spiral. Not just the Resolute, but the heart of the king itself. Solari shook her head. Are you insane? That's suicide? We barely made it out alive? And now you want to go back? I don't want to, Voss said, his voice harsh. But we have no choice. The king isn't just a force, it's a network, a connection, and it's still alive in our minds in the ship's wreckage. If we leave it now, it will continue to grow. It will always find us. Always. Lyra met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly. So what do we do? We return to where it all began, Voss said. We go to the core, but this time we make sure it's destroyed for good. We sever the link, once and for all. The silence that followed felt heavy, but it was a silence of reluctant agreement. The crew had been through hell, but they had always faced the impossible together. And now, they had one final choice: to fight for their freedom, or to succumb to the king's spiral forever. The journey back would not be easy. They had no coordinates, no clear direction. The mist around them had thickened, and the pod systems were failing. Power fluctuations sparked on the console, and the viewports flickered like dying stars. What's the status on navigation? Voss asked, trying to ignore the creeping feeling of dread gnawing at his insides. We're drifting, Lyra answered. The ship is on minimal power. The systems are down. We're blind in the mist. Great, Solari muttered under her breath. She crossed her arms, clearly frustrated. We're lost in the middle of nowhere, and we're supposed to fight the king again? Voss clenched his jaw. It's not about fighting it. It's about ending it. For good. We need to find the source of its influence. And we need to do it fast before the ship falls apart completely. The tension in the pod was thick, suffocating. With each passing moment, it felt like they were plunging deeper into an abyss. The very air around them seemed to pulse, alive, with the king's lingering presence. Then, it came. A sudden shift in the pod's direction. The gravitational field around them flickered as if something had pulled them in, a force too strong to ignore. The mist outside the viewport seemed to swirl, drawing closer, more solid, as if the very fabric of reality itself was folding in on them. And then a voice, the king's voice, surged through their minds, raw and powerful, like a burst of static. You are already part of the spiral. You cannot break free. You cannot escape me. It wasn't just in their ears. It was in their minds. They felt it, the weight of the king's presence pressing down on them, warping their thoughts, clouding their vision. The pod systems flickered again, and suddenly the viewport outside was no longer the void. It was the core, the heart of the ship, the Resolute. Voss's pulse quickened. This is it, he whispered. We're here. The mist parted, before them, revealing the ghost of the ship. The Resolute hung like a decaying monument to an ancient evil, its hull cracked and twisted, its heart still pulsing with unnatural energy. The king's presence was at its core. Lyra, Solari, and Voss exchanged a glance. This was it, the moment they had prepared for. The choice that would determine their fate. Voss slammed his hand on the control panel, guiding the pod closer to the wreckage of the Resolute. Prepare yourselves, this isn't over. Chapter 11. The heart of the spiral escape pod, approach to the Resolute time. Elapsed, 46 hours since entry distance to core, unknown hull. Integrity, 15%. Mist concentration, 90%. The pod drifted silently toward the remains of the Resolute. There was no longer any hum of life aboard the vessel, no faint mechanical groan from the ancient ship. It hung in the void, twisted and warped, like a corpse caught in the throes of time's cruel hands. The mist surrounding them thickened, congealing into dark, swirling tendrils that seemed to whisper, not in words but in presence, in a sense of hunger. Voss gripped the controls tighter, feeling the cold sweat on his palms as the pod rocked, slightly. The proximity alarms were silent now. The systems barely registered the ship's structure. It was as though the Resolute was not just a derelict ship but a wound in space-time itself, an open gateway for something far worse. We're close, Lyra murmured, her voice distant as she stared at the viewscreen. The once shiny surface of the pod's control panel had grown cracked and worn, a mirror of their journey. Battered, worn, but still holding on. What do we do when we get there? Solari's voice, low and laced with tension, cut through the silence. It's not like we have a plan. We have nothing but our will and a half-dead escape pod. I don't know, Voss said, his voice grim. He turned to face them, his gaze hardening with resolve. We'll figure it out. The core has to be where the king's power is centralized. If we destroy it, we destroy him. That's the only way out of this. But the ship, the king is everywhere in it, Lyra pointed out. How can we destroy it all? It's more than a machine. It's a living thing. Voss clenched his jaw, refusing to let his doubt take root. He'd spent too long in this nightmare to let it end like this. They had come too far, suffered too much. They had earned their escape, and they would have it. I don't care if it's a living thing or a machine, Voss said. We finish this. The pod shuddered again, the hull groaning under pressure, and the mist outside thickened, forming into shapes that flickered in the periphery of their vision. Shadows of something alive, something that wasn't quite human. Tendrils of the king's mind reaching out, trying to reclaim them, to twist them into its power once more. Then, without warning, the Resolute loomed ahead, impossibly close, its fractured silhouette looming in the mist. The spirals that had once danced with malevolent intent now appeared as jagged scars on the ship's surface. The ship had been consumed, its very form twisted into something unnatural. There it is, Voss said, voice tight. The core is right there. We make our move now. Lyra's hands flew over the controls, but there was no way to steer the pod directly into the core's heart. The gravitational pull of the dying ship was pulling them in, the force distorting the pod's course. Hold on, Voss barked, gripping the sides of his seat. The pod lurched forward, slamming into the ship's side, but it held together. The impact was jarring, sending shockwaves through their bodies, but they were inside the Resolute now, deep within its decaying hull. The black mist clung to everything, and the air was heavy, thick with an unnatural static charge. They were trapped, but they had no choice but to press on. The door to the pod hissed open and they flooded into the ship, their weapons ready, though none of them believed it would make a difference. The king was not just an enemy to fight. It was a force to be endured. They moved through the dark corridors which seemed to change before their eyes. The walls shifted, the floor slanted at impossible angles. Voss felt the ship's pulse, a strange rhythmic beat that emanated from deep within the heart of the Resolute. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the feeling became. The ship's very presence felt wrong. Every step they took felt like they were walking into the mouth of a beast that had been waiting, watching them hungry for their souls. We're getting closer, Lyra whispered, though her voice trembled. She was trying to be brave, but the toll this place was taking on her was evident. The king's influence had been digging at her mind, unraveling the edges of her sanity. They came to a massive chamber, the walls shimmering with faint pulsing energy. The center of the room held a structure that seemed both organic and mechanical, twisting and writhing. The core, the spirals of light that had once been scattered, throughout the ship now converged here, coiling and twisting, reaching toward the core like desperate, wriggling snakes. The king's influence emanated from it, a tangible force that scraped against the very fabric of their minds. Voss felt it immediately, the suffocating pressure in the air, the disorienting swirl of thoughts that weren't his own. He staggered, for a moment, but Lyra grabbed his arm, steadying him. We don't have much time, she said, her voice tight with fear. This is it. Solari's hand was on the weapon at her side, her fingers twitching. How do we destroy it? Voss's mind raced. They had no weapons powerful enough to destroy something like this. It wasn't just a machine, it was alive, and destroying it wouldn't be as simple as firing a shot. We sever the connection, he said, his voice suddenly clear. The core is the nexus. It's the center of the king's influence. If we can cut the tie, break the source, one will destroy him. How? Lyra asked. We don't have anything to sever it. Voss didn't respond immediately. He was already moving toward the glowing core. His heart pounded, each beat growing more erratic as he neared the source. His hand reached out, feeling the heat, the vibration emanating from it. It was alive, just as Lyra had said, but he knew what he had to do. "I'll do it," Voss said, a certainty in his voice that even he hadn't expected. He turned to the others. "Stay back." "What?" Solari stepped forward, eyes wide with panic. "Are you crazy? You can't—" "It's the only way," Voss interrupted. "The core is connected to the king's essence. If I destroy it, if I break the flow of energy, we'll sever him from this place." Lyra stepped forward, her hand on his arm. "Voss." He didn't look back. His hand was already on the pulsating, living surface of the core. "I'll see you on the other side." With a final breath, Voss pressed his palm against the core. Chapter 12. The Shattering Resolute Core Chamber. Time elapsed, 50 hours, since entry life support. Depleted hull integrity, 3%. Missed concentration, 100%. Voss's hand pressed into the living core, the pulsating energy surging through his fingertips, like fire coursing through his veins. His entire body shuddered in response. The sensation was both alien and familiar, as though he had always known this moment would come, that he would be the one to touch the heart of the spiral. For a moment, nothing happened. The world held its breath. The chamber bathed in an eerie, flickering glow. The spirals in the room danced more frantically, twisting around the chamber like serpents. The king's presence pressed against his mind, squeezing, suffocating. But he held firm. Then the core trembled. A deep, reverberating hum filled the chamber, shaking the walls as if the very fabric of reality was stretching. The energy within, the core flickered, then pulsed violently, sending ripples of dark, jagged light shooting outward. It was a scream. Not a sound, but a force that rattled the air and rattled their bones. Voss gasped, his body going rigid as he felt the power of the king flooding his mind. The spirals of light twisted in agony, and the mist outside the chamber seemed to come alive, writhing and contracting like a living thing. The king was not pleased. Then came the voice. "You cannot sever me. I am eternal. I am everything." The force of the words slammed into Voss's mind, threatening to tear him apart. His breath was ragged, his pulse erratic, but he kept his palm pressed against the core. His vision blurred, and the spirals twisted further. But his resolve didn't falter. "I'm done with you," Voss snarled through clenched teeth, his voice barely a whisper over the roar of the ship's shuddering interior. With every ounce of his strength, Voss focused on one thing: breaking the connection. He poured his will into the core, pushing against the spiraling light that seemed to seek him out like a hungry predator. His fingers dug into the soft surface of the core, the living material parting like flesh, until he felt something snap, not physically, but in the very fabric of reality. The spirals erupted brighter than ever, and then silence. The light in the core flickered for a split second, then collapsed inward. A deep final pulse that rattled the walls and sent shockwaves through the pod, as though the entire ship was screaming in protest. The spirals twisted into a vortex, collapsing on themselves, and the room began to shatter. Voss was thrown back as the world around him dissolved. The walls cracked, the air around him pulsing with an unbearable weight, like being in the center of a black hole. He gasped for breath, his vision blacking out for a second, before his body collided with the cold metal floor. He opened his eyes, and the sight that met him was something beyond comprehension. The core, the source of the king's power, had collapsed. It was a dying star imploding upon itself, a black hole where once had been life. The spirals, which had danced with malevolent energy, now twisted into nothingness, curling in on themselves until they disappeared entirely. The mist around them, the suffocating fog that had clung to the ship, seemed to dissipate, leaving the chamber in an unnatural, profound silence. But that silence didn't last long. The ship screamed. The entire Resolute shook violently. The walls, bent and cracked. The very structure of the ship was coming apart. It had been held together by the king's presence, and now that it had been severed, it was crumbling like ancient bones. The once majestic vessel was now a corpse, and it was dying. Voss's body was screaming in pain, every fiber of his being shredded by the force of the core's destruction. But there was no time to linger. The ship was collapsing and they had no way of knowing how long it would hold together. Lyra. Solari. Voss gasped, pushing himself to his feet, the world spinning around him. He struggled to steady himself. "We have to move, now." Lyra's voice came to him through the crackling comms, distant but clear. "Voss, what did you do?" Her voice was strained, desperate. "We felt it. The king's presence is gone. But the ship, it's falling apart." Voss finished for her, his words hoarse. He stumbled toward the escape pod, which had been miraculously spared from the chaos of the core's collapse. "We need to get out of here. It won't last much longer." The ship groaned again, the sound of twisting metal screeching through the air. The mist that had once surrounded them was now fleeing, retreating into the void as if the ship itself was being erased. Lyra and Solari appeared in the doorway, their faces pale, their eyes wide with shock. "We need to go, now." Solari shouted, her hands grabbing Voss's arm. Voss barely nodded, his mind still trying to process the enormity of what had just happened. The core was gone. The king was gone. But the ship, the thing that had been their prison for so long, was dying. The escape pod activated with a violent jolt, thrusters firing in desperation as they pushed away from the collapsing wreckage of the Resolute. Outside, the ship buckled, its massive form twisting into the void as it succumbed to its fate. It was falling apart, a once mighty ghost ship now reduced to a decaying carcass in space. For a moment, the silence outside the pod felt like a weight. The mist that had engulfed them was gone, and the stars beyond glimmered coldly, untouched by the horror that had just passed. The black hole-like pull of the ship had faded, leaving only the vast emptiness of space. Then, as the pod sped away, a flicker, just a flicker, of something in the distance. A shadow, a shape that didn't belong. Voss's heart clenched. "No," he whispered. But then it was gone, lost in the infinite dark. The escape pod continued its flight, hurtling through the void, far from the wreckage of the Resolute. But Voss knew the truth. The king had been destroyed, but there were remnants. Echoes, and it wasn't over, not yet. Chapter 13. Echoes in the Void Escape Pod. Drift in uncharted space-time. Elapsed. 56 hours since core destruction, hull integrity. 30% life support. Stabilized mist. Concentration, 0%. The silence outside the escape pod was unsettling. The steady hum of the pod's thrusters was the only sound as the crew drifted further away from the wreckage of the Resolute. They had escaped, yes, but at what cost? Voss stared out of the viewport, his eyes haunted, his thoughts a swirl of exhaustion and confusion. The stars outside were distant pinpricks of light, calm in their eternal coldness, yet he couldn't shake the sensation that they were being watched. The vastness of space had never felt so suffocating. Lyra sat in the corner, her eyes scanning the pod's systems, but her mind seemed elsewhere. Solari paced in the small confines, restless, her hand never far from her weapon. The weight of their survival had settled on them like a thick fog. They had destroyed the king, but the echoes of his power still lingered. Is it over? Lyra's voice was soft, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "We severed the king's core, but something doesn't feel right. It's like we're still connected, like we're not really free." Voss turned to face her, his expression worn. "I don't know. I thought it was over too, but there's something else. Something I can't explain." Solari stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean? Are you telling me there's more? The ship's destroyed, the core's gone, the king's dead? What else could there be?" "I don't know," Voss said again, his voice low. "It's not just the ship, it's like the king's influence was tied to something else, some kind of seed, a fragment of him, and I'm worried it's still out there." Lyra looked up at him, her brow furrowing. "But how could it survive? We saw it collapse, we were there. Not everything can be destroyed like that." Voss interrupted, his eyes growing distant. The king's mind, it wasn't just in the ship. It was in space itself. The whole Resolute was a conduit. But what if we missed something? Pod continued to drift, silent and weightless. A shiver ran down Voss's spine as a thought crept into his mind, something that had been lingering since the moment they escaped. What if it's not over at all? He murmured. What if the king's presence was never just about the ship? What if it's been spreading like an infection through the stars? Solari's eyes widened with realization. You think it's spreading? Voss nodded, his heart pounding as the implications of his words settled in. We don't know what we're dealing with. We never did. The Resolute wasn't just one ship. It was a beginning, not an end. And I think we've only just begun to see its true power. A cold silence settled in the pod. They were no longer alone in the void. The king, or what was left of him, was out there, somewhere, watching, waiting. Hours passed. The pod continued its drift, helpless in the boundless emptiness. The crew barely spoke, lost in their own thoughts as the stars beyond remained a cold, indifferent witness. But Voss couldn't rest. The echoes of the king's voice were still faint in his mind, like whispers on the edge of his consciousness. The spiral had been severed, but the pull still lingered. What do you think? Lyra asked, breaking the silence. What should we do now? Voss looked out the viewport again, his face grim. We need to find a way to make sure it's really gone. We need to search. I don't know how, but I feel like we haven't seen the last of this nightmare. Solari gripped the edge of a seat, her knuckles white. Where do we even go? We don't have coordinates. We don't have anything. We're stranded. We have the last known location of the Resolute's launch point, Voss said. It's a dead zone, but we can still try. There's bound to be something there. Lyra raised an eyebrow. Are you sure that's a good idea? It might just be more of the king's influence. We're not exactly in any condition to go hunting ghosts. I'm sure. Voss's voice was sharp now, his mind made up. It's the only lead we have. If there's something left, something we missed, that's where we'll find it. Solari crossed her arms, reluctantly nodding. Fine. But if this turns into another wild chase after something that isn't there, I'm holding you responsible. Voss gave her a tight smile. Fair enough, but I'm not giving up. The journey was long. The escape pod systems were barely functional, the power levels fluctuating. There was no way to tell how long it would take to reach the coordinates, just a slow, unending drift through the emptiness of space. But as time passed, something began to change. The air inside the pod grew heavier, more oppressive. It wasn't just the failing systems or the strain of constant uncertainty. It was a sensation, one that none of them could explain. The ship had been destroyed. The king was supposed to be gone, but the air felt wrong. A tension that hadn't been there before. It felt as if something was watching them, waiting. Then one day the pod's sensors flickered. The faintest signal appeared, a barely perceptible trace on the radar. A faint pulse like a heartbeat. Voss! Lyra's voice was tight with urgency. I've got something. A signal. It's weak, but it's there. We're not alone. Voss shot to his feet, heart pounding. Can you triangulate the source? She nodded, her fingers flying over the console. It's close, but it's hard to pinpoint. Something's blocking it. Solari's hand instinctively went to her weapon. Whatever it is, I don't like the sound of it. We're going, Voss said, eyes burning with determination. We've come this far and we're not stopping now. As the pod drew closer to the source of the signal, the tension grew thicker. The signal was intermittent, like the pulse of something distant fading in and out. But as they approached, the presence of the feeling grew stronger. The very fabric of space seemed to ripple, as though it was warping around them. We're almost there, Lyra said, her voice laced with disbelief. But what the hell is it? Before Voss could answer, the pod's sensors went haywire. The signal flared suddenly, sharp and bright, only to vanish into the darkness. Then all at once the mist returned. But this was no ordinary mist. This was thick, living mist, coiling and swirling around the pod, seeping through every crack, filling their lungs with something cold and unyielding. A voice rang out, deep and booming, more like a thought than a sound, echoing in their minds. You cannot escape the spiral. It is in you. It is in all things. The king's presence was still there, not dead, but awake, and it was closer than ever. Chapter 14. The Uncharted World Escape Pod. Approaching an unknown planet. Time elapsed, 65 hours, since core destruction hull. Integrity, 15% life support, critical mist, concentration, increasing. The mist clung to the escape pod like a living thing, swirling and undulating in the cramped interior. Voss's breath was shallow, his heart racing. The voice, that dark and terrible presence, echoed in his mind like a distant thunderclap, reverberating through every fiber of his being. You cannot escape the spiral. It is in you. It is in all things. It wasn't just a warning. It was a curse. The mist outside the pod thickened, clouding the viewport. Whatever had been lurking out there, whatever had been waiting for them, had found them. The ship trembled as the weight of the presence pushed against its walls, as though it too was trying to suffocate them. Lyra's voice was tight with fear, barely audible over the whine of the pod's failing systems. Voss, we need to get out of here. This isn't just a signal. It's something more. This mist. It's alive. I know, Voss said, his voice grim. He wiped the sweat from his brow, his thoughts racing. They had barely escaped the Resolute, only to find themselves trapped again. But now it wasn't just the king's ship they were running from. It was the king's mind, alive and watching. The signal they had been following had led them here, to a planet that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The mist now seemed to originate from the very surface of the world, a swirling vortex that spiraled upward into the atmosphere. We need to land, Voss said, though his heart twisted with dread at the thought. We can't keep drifting like this. Whatever's out there, whatever this mist is, we need to confront it. We need answers. Lyra's gaze flickered to the scanner readings, the urgency in her eyes evident. The planet's atmosphere is unstable. We won't make it unless we find a suitable place to land. I'll find it, Voss said, tapping into the pod's failing navigation system. He squinted at the readouts as they flickered in and out. The planet was alive, but it wasn't just alive in the usual sense. The readings were erratic, unstable, as though the planet itself were at war with the very concept of existence. The mist outside thickened once more, closing in like a living entity, creeping along the pod's hull with malevolent intent. Now, Solari growled, her voice steely with determination. We've been running for too long. It's time we face this thing head-on. Voss couldn't argue with her. They were running out of time. The planet's gravity was pulling them closer, the pod's engines sputtering as they struggled against the increasing weight of the mist. The ship groaned under the pressure, its structural integrity at the breaking point. A sudden jolt rattled them all, and the pod began to plummet toward the planet's surface. They were caught in the gravitational pull, unable to slow down. The black mist outside became an almost solid wall, thick and swirling as if trying to swallow them whole. Brace for impact, Voss shouted. The escape pod hit the planet's surface with a bone-jarring crash, throwing the crew against their restraints. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, broken only by the slow, labored hissing of the pod systems shutting down. Voss groaned, struggling to regain his senses. He had been knocked unconscious during the crash, but the cold, suffocating mist outside had brought him back to his feet. His head throbbed, and the pain in his chest told him that he wasn't unscathed. But there was no time to worry about that now. Lyra, Solari, he called, his voice raw. I'm here, came Lyra's voice, breathless but steady. She appeared from the shadows, her clothes torn but otherwise unharmed. The pods wrecked but were alive. Voss nodded, pushing himself to his feet. The pod's interior was a mess of shattered panels and flashing lights, but it was still functional enough to provide some shelter. For now. He turned to look out the viewport and his breath caught in his throat. The planet was even worse than he'd expected. It was a wasteland, with jagged mountains and vast stretches of barren ground, swirling with thick, unnatural mists that obscured everything in sight. The air was heavy with the same oppressive weight that had been pressing in on them from space, and the ground was uneven, cracked, and dead. "This is the heart of it," Voss muttered, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the planet's surface. "This is where it all comes from. This place is wrong," Solari added, her voice tight with disbelief. "It feels like it's alive, like the planet itself is infected." Voss didn't have the answers, but they had no choice. They had to find out what was happening here, and put an end to it before it consumed them all. He looked around, assessing their situation. The pod was a wreck, but it would provide enough shelter to get their bearings. They had to move fast. "We need to get out of here. This mist won't hold up for long, and if there's something to this planet, we need to find it before it finds us." They gathered what little gear they could salvage from the wreckage, then stepped out into the alien landscape. The moment they left the pod, the mist seemed to come alive, swirling around them with a soft, whispering sound, like voices calling from a distant nightmare. The air was thick, almost suffocating as the mist wrapped around their limbs, pulling at them as they moved. Lyra, leading the way, stopped abruptly, her eyes widening. "Did you hear that?" Voss listened. It was a faint sound at first, like a distant heartbeat thumping against the silence. Then it became louder, closer, a rhythmic sound that seemed to vibrate in the very ground beneath their feet. "What the hell is that?" Solari asked, her voice tense with fear. Before Voss could answer, the ground beneath them shuddered. The mist which had been swirling around them suddenly parted, revealing a massive structure, a black spire reaching into the sky, covered in intricate spirals and alien symbols. It stood like a monument, silent and towering in the mist. Voss felt a wave of recognition. This was no ordinary structure. This was something built by the king. The spiral had left its mark here, and now they were standing at the center of it. "Let's get closer," Voss said, his voice hoarse. "If we're going to end this, we need to find out what's inside." The three of them moved toward the spire, every step feeling heavier as the mist pressed in around them. With each step, the thumping heartbeat grew louder, reverberating through their bones, guiding them toward the center of this alien labyrinth. And then, just as they reached the base of the spire, a voice echoed, not through the air, but directly into their minds. "You think you can destroy me. You think you can escape me, but the spiral is within you. It has always been within you." The mist parted and the Spiral King's image appeared, not in the form of a ship or a ghost, but as a being, alive and watching them, waiting for the moment when they would finally realize the truth. And in that moment, they knew. They were no longer on a simple mission to survive. They were here to destroy something far older, far more powerful, the heart of the spiral itself. Chapter 15. The heart of the spiral surface of the unknown planet. Time elapsed, 72 hours since core destruction. Hull integrity, 5%. Life support, critical missed. Concentration, 100%. The voice of the king pulsed in their minds like a heavy, insistent drumbeat. Its words felt like a physical presence curling around them like the mist itself, pressing in from all sides, suffocating their thoughts. "You think you can destroy me. You think you can escape me. But the spiral is within you. It has always been within you." Voss's heart thundered in his chest and he stumbled as a wave of vertigo hit him. The spire before them was more than just a structure. It was an extension of the king's will, a manifestation of the power that had once been locked within, the resolute. It was alive, and it was waiting. He glanced over at Lyra and Solari. Both women stood frozen for a moment, their faces pale with shock, their hands trembling as they processed the magnitude of what was happening. "Voss, this isn't just about the ship anymore," Lyra whispered, her voice hoarse. This is something else. This place, this mist, it's alive, And it's speaking to us. It's pulling at us. Voss nodded, swallowing hard. I know. The king's influence didn't die when we destroyed the core. It transcended the ship. It's been here, spreading, feeding off the energy of this planet. This spire. He glanced up, seeing its jagged edges disappearing into the roiling clouds above. It's the source. Solari clenched her fists, her eyes narrow with determination. Then we end it here. We end it all. Whatever it takes. They moved closer to the base of the spire, the mist swirling around their ankles, thick and suffocating. The ground beneath them was cracked, uneven, but solid. Every step they took felt heavier, as if the planet itself was trying to hold them back. The heartbeat, the pulse of the king's mind, throbbed louder, almost deafening. The entrance to the spire loomed ahead, a dark, gaping maw in the stone. The air around it shimmered, and, as they approached, they could see the faintest glow coming from within, pulsing in time with the heartbeat. Stay sharp, Voss warned, voice low. This is it. The heart of the spiral. Once we step inside, there's no turning back. Three of them exchanged one final look before they entered the spire. Inside, the walls were smooth and black, lined with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as they moved, like the spirals of a never-ending whirlpool. The air was thick with a palpable energy, and the low hum of the pulse vibrated through their bodies, sending sharp, painful tingles down their spines. Lyra paused, her breath catching as she examined the walls. This isn't just a structure. It's alive. The very walls. They're breathing. Voss felt the same chill creeping up his neck, a sense of being swallowed whole as if the spire were a living organism, constantly shifting around them, guiding them deeper. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the air became. The voice of the king echoed in their minds once more, louder, more insistent. You are already lost. You cannot fight the spiral. It has already claimed you. You cannot escape it. It is in the very core of your being. It is in your blood. Voss gritted, his teeth forcing the voice from his mind. He could feel the weight of it pressing on him, trying to make him doubt everything they had fought for. But he knew one thing for sure. They couldn't stop now, not when they were this close. We're getting closer, Voss muttered, his eyes scanning the endless corridors that seemed to stretch out before them. The walls pulsated, the patterns shifting as if the spire itself was alive, responding to their every movement. Look, Solari said suddenly, pointing ahead. There, at the far end of the corridor, a large chamber opened up. The walls of the chamber were lined with glowing symbols, the same spirals they had seen on the planet's surface. But at the center of the room stood something more, a dark shape, enormous and swirling with energy, hovering in midair like a massive heart, beating in time with the pulse that had haunted them since the moment they arrived. The king's presence was strong here, overwhelming, filling the room with its suffocating weight. Voss took a step forward, and the air seemed to bend around him. The mist that had followed them outside had crept into the spire, filling the chamber with its eerie glow, and at the center of the room the massive beating form seemed to acknowledge them, its pulse intensifying. It's him, Lyra whispered, fear rising in her voice. It's the heart of the spiral. The heart was a mass of swirling energy, dark and powerful, constantly shifting like liquid, but with a form that almost resembled a face that was watching them. The eyes of the king, or at least what remained of him, glowed within the mass, staring at them with an intensity that chilled them to the bone. Voss felt the pull, the urge to step forward, to surrender to the dark force that had infected the very fabric of the universe. It whispered to him, the same voice that had haunted him throughout their journey, offering power, knowledge, and immortality. You will never escape. You are mine. All that you have done has only led you here. There is no end to the spiral. There is only me. He took a deep breath, fighting the temptation. This was the moment. The heart of the spiral was within their reach. They couldn't let it consume them. Solari, Lyra, get ready. Voss said through gritted teeth. We finish this, here and now. With a sharp motion, he drew the weapon he had scavenged from the wreckage of the Resolute, a modified plasma cannon. The weapon hummed with energy and he leveled it at the heart. On my mark, Voss said, his voice steady despite the chaos raging in his mind. He felt it again, the king's influence. The pulse of the heart reverberated in his chest, making his breath shallow, his thoughts clouded. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, clawing at his consciousness. You cannot fight me. I am part of you. The spiral is in your blood. You are mine. Voss forced the thought aside. He couldn't let it control him. This was their one chance. Now, he shouted. Solari and Lyra fired simultaneously, their weapons unleashing blasts of concentrated energy at the heart. The beams of light hit the dark mass with a blinding flash, and the chamber shook violently as the heart writhed in response. The king's voice roared in their minds, louder than ever, a cacophony of rage and power that threatened to break them. The ground beneath their feet cracked, and the walls began to crack and warp as the spire itself seemed to fight against their assault. Voss didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger, sending a concentrated blast into the core of the heart. There was a terrible screech, a sound like metal grinding against stone, and then the spire erupted in a brilliant explosion of light. The heart of the spiral exploded in a violent burst of energy, and the chamber began to collapse around them. They had done it. For a brief moment, everything was silent. The heart was gone. The king's voice had faded. The spiral was destroyed. But as the dust settled and the mist began to dissipate, they knew that their battle was far from over. The spire crumbled around them, but as they fled back to the surface, the mist began to clear, revealing a terrifying truth. The universe had been changed forever. The king might be gone, but the power he had unleashed was still alive, in the stars, in the very fabric of space itself. Chapter 16. Echoes of the spiral surface of the unknown planet. Time elapsed, 90 hours, since core destruction. Hull integrity, 4%. Life support, depleted mist. Concentration, diminishing. The air was still, as if the entire planet had held its breath, waiting for the moment to exhale. In the wake of the explosion that had torn the heart of the spiral apart, there was only silence. The oppressive, suffocating presence of the king was gone, but it had left a mark, a scar upon the very fabric of the universe. Voss stood alone in the center of the devastated landscape, staring out over the jagged horizon. The spire had crumbled to dust, its influence dissipating like a fading dream. But beneath that silence, beneath the calm, there was an undeniable hum, a faint pulse, echoing like the remnants of the king's mind, still trying to extend its reach. The others were nearby, each one lost in their thoughts. Solari, her armor scuffed and dented from the battle, stood with her arms crossed, eyes scanning the horizon for any further signs of danger. Lyra, ever the pragmatist, was examining their surroundings, making sure the ship's wreckage was stable enough for extraction. Her hands were trembling slightly, but her eyes were sharp, calculating, always calculating. Voss closed his eyes for a moment, letting the stillness of the planet wash over him. They had won. The king was gone, but the victory felt hollow. The spiral's influence had been destroyed, but the battle had come at a heavy price. They had unleashed something with their actions, something far greater than they had realized. The pulse still reverberated in the distance, a constant reminder that the universe would never be the same. Voss, Lyra's voice cut through his thoughts. We need to go. The systems are offline, but I've got enough power to get us back to the Omen. The rest of the fleet is waiting. Voss nodded, but he didn't move right away. The king's gone, but what about the spiral? What about the power it left behind? Lyra approached, her expression serious. We don't know what's left. But we can't stay here. The pulse is still there, faint, but it's weakening. If we don't act quickly, it might start to spread again. We're too late for that, Solari added grimly, joining them. The spiral may be gone, but the ripples are still felt. Whatever this energy is, it doesn't just disappear. It's like a wound that keeps bleeding. Then we stop it from bleeding, Voss said firmly, turning away from the horizon. He gestured to the wreckage of their pod. Let's get to the Omen and make sure this thing never happens again. Hours later, they were back aboard the Omen, the ship they had used for their initial escape. The remnants of the Resolute were far behind them now, and the crew had done their best to repair the most critical systems of their craft. Still, the damage was severe, and their supplies were nearly gone. Every system was running on fumes, and the faint hum of the power core was a constant reminder of how fragile their situation had become. "We're barely holding together," Lyra muttered as she worked at a console, trying to stabilize the life support systems. "But we're alive." Voss stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the swirling mist outside the viewport. The once heavy fog had receded, but its influence lingered. It had settled like a storm cloud, hovering just out of reach, a reminder of what they had faced. "Alive," he repeated, though it felt like more of a question than a statement. He turned toward Solari, who had just finished assessing the tactical readouts. "What's our status?" Solari's face was grim as she approached. "We're in deep space now. No immediate threats that we can detect, but the fallout from the spiral's destruction is spreading. The ripples are out there, Voss. Across sectors. I don't know how long we've got before the universe feels the full weight of what we did." Voss's jaw tightened. The king's influence had been vast, but the energy of the spiral itself, that dark, terrible force, had never truly been destroyed. He could feel it, like a distant pulse vibrating through the very fabric of space, a low hum that gnawed at the edges of his mind. "How long before the Federation catches wind of what's happened?" Voss asked, his voice low. He didn't need to say it. They both knew that the Federation, or any galactic power for that matter, would be quick to investigate if they realized the extent of the destruction. Lyra glanced up, her expression hardening. "I can't say for certain, but we won't have long before they start searching. We've been gone for days, and there's no telling what they've learned. The Resolute wasn't just a ship. It was a key, a weapon. The Federation won't let the knowledge of its destruction go unanswered. That's why we need to stay ahead of them," Solari said. "We've destroyed one part of the spiral, but there's still more out there. There's still the power of the king lingering. If we let the wrong people get their hands on what's left, it could spell the end of us all." Voss nodded. The mission had started as an effort to retrieve a lost ship, but now it was something far bigger. They were dealing with an ancient power that had once sought to consume the galaxy. And while they had struck a devastating blow, the consequences of their actions were just beginning to unfold. "We need to regroup. Find the others who are still out there," Voss said, his voice growing firmer. "The king's reach isn't just over. It's only begun." He stepped away from the console, turning toward the navigation deck. "We're going to find where the spiral's power is still active and end it, once and for all." 3 days later. The Omen drifted through the fringes of the galaxy, hidden in the depths of space. The crew had patched together a plan, but there was still a nagging uncertainty in the back of their minds. The power of the spiral, of the king, was unlike anything they had faced. Even if the king was gone, its influence could spread through the galaxy like a disease, infecting everything it touched. Lyra paced the control room, her mind clearly working through the next steps. "There's a disturbance on the fringe of the Andromeda sector. It's small, but..." She paused, her hand hovering over the console. "It matches the energy readings from the heart. It's a remnant." Solari stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "A remnant? We're not going back there. We can't afford to." "We don't have a choice," Voss replied, voice steady. "The longer we wait, the harder it's going to be to contain it. This isn't over, not by a long shot. Whatever's left of the spiral, we need to find it and destroy it." Lyra turned toward the viewport, staring out into the abyss of space. "We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore, are we?" "No," Voss said, his voice quiet but determined. "We're fighting for the future, for everyone." The Omen roared to life, its engine sputtering for a moment before catching. The crew had a mission and a universe to save. Chapter 17. The Shattered Sky Fringe of the Andromeda Sector. Time elapsed, 120 hours since core destruction. Hull integrity, 2%. Life support, critical missed. Concentration, fading. The Omen shuddered violently as it navigated the uncharted territory near the Andromeda Sector. The pulse they had detected was growing stronger, reverberating through the hull, and the mist that had once cloaked the planet was now following them, an invisible shadow that clung to the ship like a parasite. The quiet hum of the engines was punctuated by occasional groans from the structural damage. The ship was barely holding together. Lyra stood at the helm, eyes scanning the data feed in front of her. The pulse is still faint, but it's definitely coming from a singularity, something powerful, something artificial. Solari stood behind her, arms crossed, her expression tight. Artificial? Like another spire? Not exactly, Lyra said, tapping a few keys. This isn't a natural formation. There's no architecture or sign of a structured energy source. It's something else. I've never seen anything like it. Voss stood near the viewport, looking out at the dark expanse of space. The star systems here were sparse, their light dim and distant. The shadows of space seemed to stretch endlessly, making the distance feel like an eternity. It was hard to believe that the pulse, the last vestiges of the king's power, was growing closer. The king's influence is still out there, Voss muttered, his hand resting on the ship's cold metal wall. We knew this wouldn't be over. There's something bigger at work here. Solari's voice was low but steady. We haven't even seen the worst of it, have we? Voss turned to face her. Not yet. He stepped toward the communications console where Lyra was still working. Can you get a clearer signal on that energy disturbance? Lyra frowned. I've tried to boost the signal as much as possible, but whatever it is, it's isolating itself. Like it's blocking us out intentionally. It's like a dead zone of energy. Like it's trying to erase itself from existence. Nay, quite erasing itself, Solari said, her tone calculating. More like restructuring. If it's connected to the spiral, then whatever remains of the king's power might be reorganizing, trying to form a new core. Voss's stomach churned. The idea of the king returning in any form was terrifying. But there was something worse, lurking in the back of his mind. The spiral might have been far older and far more complex than they had realized. The king might have been a vessel, not the origin. Lyra exhaled sharply. We'll be within range of the disturbance in another 2 hours. I don't know what we're going to find, but we have to prepare for anything. We won't survive another attack like we did on the planet. We'll make it through, Voss said, his voice firm. We have no other choice. 2 hours later, the Omen dropped out of faster-than-light travel, the distant stars twinkling eerily in the void of space. Ahead of them, the faint glow of the energy disturbance slowly revealed itself, a swirl of light and shadow, distant but growing closer. The pulses were irregular now, sending waves of energy in unpredictable patterns. Solari was at tactical, her eyes glued to the monitor. We're entering the anomalies sphere of influence. The readings are chaotic. This thing is messing with our instruments. The ship groaned, a shiver running through its hull as the disturbance intensified. Lyra, we need to slow down. This thing could be a trap, Voss warned, his hand on the armrest of the command chair. I'm trying, Voss, Lyra replied, sweat beading on her forehead. But the gravity well around it is distorting our trajectory. I can't slow down, without risking full system failure. Suddenly, the ship lurched and a series of alarms blared throughout the vessel. The hull screamed as the ship was yanked off course. Lyra, Voss shouted, his voice filled with urgency. What the hell's happening? It's the disturbance. It's pulling us in. I can't hold us back anymore. Lyra's hands danced over the controls, desperately trying to regain control. Voss's heart raced as he saw the distance to the disturbance shrinking. They were being pulled toward it. We're going in, Solari said, her voice tight. Get ready. This could be it. As the ship neared the epicenter of the disturbance, everything around them seemed to warp. The stars stretched and twisted in strange, unnatural patterns, the fabric of space itself seeming to bend and twist under the influence of the anomaly. The mist, that insidious, ever-present fog, was now swirling around the ship like a living thing. Then, just as the ship's engines screamed in protest, they were thrown into the center of the disturbance. The world around them shattered. Everything seemed to dissolve into light, sound, and silence all at once. The ship rattled violently as if it were being torn apart at the molecular level. Voss's vision blurred, and the sound of his heart pounding in his ears drowned out everything else. Then, everything stopped. The ship was still. No hum of the engines. No pulse of the disturbance, just eerie silence. When Voss opened his eyes, the stars were gone. The vast emptiness of space had been replaced by something else entirely. They were in a different place. The sky around them was not the same sky. The stars had been replaced by a swirling black void that shifted in strange kaleidoscopic patterns. The mist had thickened into a dense, moving cloud, almost alive, curling around the ship like a creature searching for its prey. "Where are we?" Lyra's voice was shaky, the uncertainty creeping into her words. "I don't know," Voss answered, his own voice tight. "But this is no ordinary anomaly. We've crossed into something else." Solari's eyes narrowed, scanning the readings. "It's like we're inside the heart of the spiral. But it's different. I've never seen anything like this before." Lyra stood up, staring out the viewport in horror. "There's no universe here. Just this endless void. How is that even possible?" A low hum vibrated through the ship, echoing through their bones. It was the pulse again, stronger than before, a vibration that seemed to resonate not just within the ship, but within the very air they breathed. Suddenly, a shape appeared in the distance. A massive, sprawling structure. An impossibly vast ship, much larger than the Resolute. It was drifting in the void, its surface covered in intricate patterns and glowing symbols that pulsated in time with the energy they had been chasing. It's alive," Solari whispered, staring in disbelief. "The structure, it's alive." Voss felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a remnant of the spiral. This was something else. Something more ancient, more powerful than they had ever imagined. The king had been but a fragment. This was the true heart of the spiral, and they were standing on the precipice of its awakening. Chapter 18. Heart of the Spiral. Inside the living void. Time elapsed, 132. Hours since core destruction, hull integrity, 1%. Life support, failing mist. Concentration, high. The ship drifted motionless in the void, the once pristine exterior of the Omen now battered, scarred, and held together by little more than a thread. The endless dark around them seemed to consume all sense of direction. The stars, once their guiding lights, were nowhere to be seen. They were lost in a place beyond time, a realm that twisted their perception and disoriented their senses. The vast structure ahead loomed in silence, its organic, undulating surface reflecting an eerie glow. It was not a ship in the traditional sense. The form was something far more complex, alive, and ever-shifting. Massive tendrils of energy snaked out from its core, swirling around like enormous fingers reaching for the crew. It pulsed with a rhythm that mirrored the heartbeat of the universe itself. Voss stood at the helm, his hands gripping the edge of the console. The weight of what they had discovered hung heavy on him. He had believed the king's reign was over, that their battle was done, but what they were facing now was so much worse. A living entity at the center of the spiral, its power stretching across the galaxy, bending reality itself. This can't be real," Lyra murmured, standing beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's like we've entered a new dimension, but it feels wrong. All of it." Voss's eyes never left the structure. "It's alive. It's aware." Solari stepped up, her expression grim but focused. "This isn't just some ship we can destroy. This is the heart of the spiral, the origin. Everything we've fought against, everything the king represented. It's connected to this. The mist outside seemed to grow thicker, its presence now fully enveloping the ship. It pressed against the hull like a suffocating fog, whispering in voices that were impossible to understand, yet felt so familiar. The sound was low at first, like distant murmurs. But as the minutes passed, the voices grew clearer, more insistent. They seemed to echo in the very fabric of space. "You are not meant to be here." The words reverberated in their minds, as though the entity itself was speaking directly into their consciousness. It was neither a voice of anger nor warning, but a presence and cold, ancient, and incomprehensible. "What is it saying?" Solari asked, her eyes scanning the consoles for any signs of disturbance. "Is this some kind of psychic attack?" Lyra shuddered. "No, this isn't an attack. It's trying to communicate." Voss stepped forward, his gaze locked onto the undulating shape of the massive structure. "It's asking us to leave, but we can't just go. We have to understand what this is, why it's here." Lyra shook her head. "Voss, this thing, whatever it is, it's alive. It's the root of everything we've encountered. The king, the spiral, all of it. If we don't find a way to destroy it, everything we've fought for will be lost. It'll spread again." The low hum grew louder, vibrating through the ship's hull, and the mist outside seemed to form figures, shifting, insubstantial shadows that stretched across the void. They swarmed around the ship like dark specters trying to suffocate it. These were no ordinary illusions. The presence of the Yao ship was manifesting in physical form. The voice, now clearer than before, rumbled again inside their minds. "Foolish, you cannot erase what has always been." The mist shifted, and for a moment the figures coalesced into something familiar. They were images from the crew's past, memories, fractured and distorted, playing out like a distorted dream. Voss saw his younger self, staring in horror as a city crumbled under the weight of the spiral's power. He saw Solari's first mission, where she had lost everything to the unrelenting pull of the king's influence. Lyra's moments of isolation, abandoned in the depths of space, her trust in humanity shattered. The mist was showing them their guilt, their weaknesses, the doubts they had buried deep inside. Solari stepped forward, her voice harsh. "It's trying to break us. This is what the spiral does. It manipulates us, makes us question everything we've fought for. We can't let it win," Voss said firmly, turning toward the crew. "We came here to destroy the heart of the spiral, to end this. And we will." Lyra nodded. "We need to find the core of the structure. It's the only way we'll get control over it. We've got to shut it down from the inside." Voss's eyes glinted with determination. "We have to move, fast. We don't know what else it can do, but we're not leaving here empty-handed." With a deep breath, the crew moved toward the airlock. Their suits were barely functional, and the ship's failing systems made every step a struggle, but they had no choice. They couldn't let the spiral take hold again. The airlock hissed open, and the crew stepped into the void. They were tethered to the ship by lines, each movement measured as they crossed the distance to the pulsating structure ahead. Every step forward felt like stepping deeper into the heart of the universe, into the very dark core of the spiral. As they approached the structure, the mist parted, revealing a massive opening in the center of the living ship. Inside, it glowed with an unearthly light, and the air hummed with a strange energy. "We're inside," Solari said, her voice low. "Now what?" Voss's eyes scanned the area. The walls of the living ship were pulsating, shifting in organic patterns like veins and arteries. The hum seemed to grow louder, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. "The core's near," Voss said. "We need to find it. Now." They moved deeper into the structure, every step taken with caution. It felt like walking through the innermost reaches of the spiral, a place where the boundaries of reality seemed thin, fragile, and easily broken. The further they traveled, the more intense the energy became. The walls pulsed in rhythm with their hearts, and the air felt thick with a weight that was difficult to describe. They were no longer just within the ship. They were inside the living consciousness of the spiral itself. Then they reached it. At the center of the ship was an enormous core, a swirling mass of energy, a black hole of pure power. Tendrils of energy snaked out from it, wrapping around the walls like roots, feeding the entire structure. "This is it," Lyra whispered. "This is the heart of the spiral." Voss stepped forward, his hands outstretched, feeling the energy around him crackle with tension. "We need to shut it down. Now." The core pulsed once more, a deep, resonating sound filling the air. And then the ship spoke again. "You will never escape. You will be consumed by what you have awoken." The voice was not threatening. It was simply stating a fact, and as the core pulsed again, the entire ship began to shake. The walls trembled, and the energy in the air began to twist violently. "This isn't over," Solari said, voice tense. "We have to destroy it. Now." Voss looked at his team, determination burning in his eyes. "Then let's finish this." Chapter 19. The Heart of the Spiral. Inside the living void. Time elapsed, 145 hours since core destruction, hull integrity, 0% life support, critical missed, concentration, overwhelming. The core thrummed violently, its dark tendrils wrapping around the walls like living serpents. It was no longer a subtle hum. It was a force that vibrated through every molecule of air, every inch of the ship, every heartbeat. The pulse echoed in their chests, in their minds, as though it were trying to sync with their very existence. The very fabric of reality seemed to warp around them, bending and twisting with the raw power emanating from the heart of the spiral. Lyra's voice cut through the tense silence. "We need to overload the core, destroy its central energy source. If we can destabilize it, we might have a chance of breaking the link to the rest of the spiral." Voss, his pulse racing, his mind already working through countless scenarios, nodded. "We don't have time. It's already beginning to fight back. We have to disrupt its connection to the rest of the galaxy. Now." Solari, ever pragmatic, was already analyzing the swirling mass of energy at the center of the ship. Her face was drawn tight with concentration. "The core itself is shielded. No conventional weapon will breach it. We need to tap into its own energy flow and redirect it." "Redirect it?" Lyra's eyes widened. "We're talking about an ancient living entity that can reshape space itself. How are we supposed to control that kind of power?" Voss turned to the others, resolve in his eyes. "We don't control it. We let it destroy itself." They could feel the ship's energy shifting again, the walls of the chamber humming louder, the core surging with greater intensity. The tendrils of energy snaked closer, almost as if it were aware of their presence, aware of their defiance. The mist outside had begun to swirl faster, rushing inward like a tidal wave, pressing at the edges of the ship and creeping into the core. It felt as though the heart of the spiral was aware of their every move, anticipating their next decision. It wanted them to fail. It needed them to fail. "Are we ready?" Voss asked, turning to his team. His voice was steady, but inside his nerves were fraying. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was the final stand, the moment where everything they'd fought for would be decided. Solari adjusted her harness, securing it tightly. "We're not getting another chance. If we don't do this, everything ends. All the lives lost, all the sacrifices. It'll have been for nothing." Lyra gave him a nod, though her face was pale. "All right, we'll overload the system and force it to destabilize. But we'll need to get close enough to the core's energy conduits. If we can create a feedback loop, it'll collapse the system from the inside out." Voss gritted his teeth. "Then let's go before it's too late." The crew moved deeper into the heart of the living ship. The walls pulsed with life, the organic material shifting and flowing as though it were breathing. Every step they took felt like they were walking further into the belly of a beast, one whose will had been forged through millennia. The mist pressed in on all sides, a heavy, suffocating presence. Voss could feel the weight of it in his chest, the air thick and impossible to breathe. He could hear whispers again, Fragments of thoughts, fragments of voices, all converging into one entity that was watching them. You are intruders in the Sacred Heart. The voice was deep, ancient, and suffused with an overwhelming power that made the air feel brittle. Foolish beings, you do not understand. We understand enough. Solari's voice cut through the darkness, her words filled with defiance. We're ending this. As they neared the heart of the core, the ship seemed to resist them. The walls twisted and distorted as though trying to push them away, trying to stop them from reaching the center. The energy tendrils lashed out, and the air crackled with raw, unpredictable power. The ground beneath their feet rippled, undulating like the surface of a disturbed ocean. They were close now, close enough that they could feel the core's power trying to pull them in. They could feel it inside their very bodies. It wanted them to fail. It wanted them to be consumed. Voss's hand tightened around the activation device they had stolen from the Omen's dwindling supplies. The device would be their only hope to overload the core. It was a risky maneuver, a calculated gamble, but it was their best shot. "This is it," Voss said, his voice low. "Once we activate the feedback loop, we won't have long before the entire structure begins to collapse. We need to move quickly." Lyra glanced back at him, her eyes narrowing. "Understood. You won't have to tell me twice." Solari led the way, her steps confident despite the chaos around them. The closer they got to the core, the more intense the energy felt, like an invisible weight pressing on them from all sides. It was alive, undeniably, frighteningly alive. When they reached the central chamber, they saw the heart, a massive, swirling mass of energy suspended in a field of light. Its core was alive, a shifting mass of tendrils and pulsing light. It was as if the very heart of the universe had taken physical form, its power incomprehensible. Lyra moved first, attaching the feedback device to the conduit, her hands steady, despite the growing intensity of the energy surrounding them. The core began to pulse faster, brighter, as the feedback loop started to take effect. "It's working," Lyra shouted. "We're destabilizing it." But the heart of the spiral wasn't going down without a fight. The core flared to life with a deafening roar, sending shockwaves through the ship. The energy surged out in every direction, and the walls of the chamber trembled violently. "No," Voss shouted, reaching out to Lyra. "We need to finish it. Now." Just as he said that, the tendrils shot toward them, lashing out with ferocity. Time seemed to slow as the ship around them shook with such intensity that the walls began to crack. Lyra pushed the device further into the conduit. Almost there. The core let out a final deafening scream, a wail of frustration and rage. It was a sound that echoed across the dimensions, a sound that reverberated through the very fabric of reality. And then, with a final surge of energy, the core collapsed. The walls of the ship cracked open as a blinding light filled the room. The ship shook so violently that Voss was thrown to the ground, the last remnants of the core's power rippling through the air, shattering the structure from the inside. The ship, the heart of the spiral, was dying. They didn't know how long. They were unconscious, but when they finally awoke, they found themselves floating in the cold, empty void. The ship was gone. The structure had disintegrated, leaving only the echoes of its final death. The mist had lifted. Voss slowly sat up, his mind reeling from the destruction they had caused. They had done it. They had destroyed the heart of the spiral. But at what cost? The void stretched endlessly in every direction, silent and empty. The universe, it seemed, had been given a second chance. Chapter 20. Aftermath drifting in the void. Time elapsed. 12 hours since core destruction, hull integrity, gone life support, failing mist. Concentration, none. Voss awoke to the sound of a faint beeping, then the oppressive silence. His head throbbed, and as his eyes flickered open, he saw the stars, distant, cold, and unyielding. He was still inside the Omen, but the ship was no longer what it had been. The walls were cracked and fragmented, the glowing consoles dimmed to a dull flicker. The once vibrant humming of the engines was now a distant memory. It was as if the ship had become nothing more than a hollow shell, bereft of purpose, adrift, In the void. He pushed himself off the cold floor, his limbs heavy, aching. The air was thin and smelled faintly of burnt ozone. The crew, his crew, was scattered around the chamber, unconscious but alive. For a moment he thought it might have all been a dream. But the wreckage around him, the silence, and the dim light told a different story. Voss groaned as he stumbled over to Lyra, who was beginning to stir. Her eyes fluttered open and she sat up with a sharp breath, her gaze wild but quickly focused. "Voss?" she rasped, her voice hoarse. "Is it over?" He nodded slowly, his voice rough. "It's over. The spiral's heart is gone. The king is no more." Lyra's expression softened, relief and exhaustion mixing on her face. She took a deep breath, then looked around. "We did it, but at what cost?" Voss didn't have an answer. They destroyed the heart of the spiral, but they had also fractured their ship beyond recognition. The Omen was beyond repair, a ship that had once carried them on a journey to end the reign of the spiral, now reduced to driftwood in the vast empty void. Solari groaned nearby, rolling onto her side as she came to. Her dark eyes opened, scanning the wreckage around them. "What happened?" she muttered, rubbing her forehead. Her voice was faint, but steady. Voss pushed to his feet, his knees trembling from the lingering effects of the core's energy. "The core collapsed. The spiral's heart is gone. The mist is gone." Solari's brow furrowed as she tried to process the weight of the situation. "But the ship, it's destroyed. There's nothing left." "There's nothing left," Lyra confirmed, standing up to join them. "We're stranded in the middle of nowhere." Voss stood tall even as the weight of the truth settled heavily in his chest. "But we've still won. The spiral is finished." "Is it?" Solari's voice was soft, filled with uncertainty. She walked over to one of the damaged consoles and began to inspect it. "It can't be that easy, can it? The king might be gone, but there are still pieces of the spiral scattered across the galaxy. Still remnants of that force. There's no telling what the real consequences of this might be." A heavy silence fell over the crew as each of them pondered the implications of their actions. They had shattered the core of the spiral, but had they truly destroyed it? Or had they only severed one thread of an ancient and powerful web? Voss looked out through the shattered viewport. The stars beyond twinkled coldly in the void. There was no mist, no swirling darkness that had once consumed everything around them. The galaxy seemed almost too still, too quiet. "We've broken the spiral's grip on the galaxy," Voss said quietly, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something larger still loomed in the silence. "But Solari's right. We don't know what's left behind. Whatever remnants of the king's power are still out there, we'll find them, and we'll deal with them." Lyra shook her head. "Even if we can't get back to a functioning civilization, we still have our minds, our bodies. We'll figure out what happens next. We have the knowledge now. We know how to stop it." For a brief moment, hope flickered, but it was fleeting. Solari spoke up again, her voice filled with hard reality. "You two make it sound like it's done, but there are unknowns out there. The spiral's influence is ancient. What we just did, that was only a fraction of it. We don't even know the full extent of its reach. The question is, do we try to find what remains and destroy it? Or do we leave it to drift and hope it fades away on its own?" Voss took a deep breath. "We don't have a choice. We can't leave something like this to linger. If there's even the smallest chance of it coming back, we need to hunt it down." Lyra stood beside him, her eyes searching the ruined landscape of their ship. "We can do it. We've come this far." A pause lingered as Solari's dark eyes narrowed, as if weighing the consequences of their decision. "All right then," she said, standing straighter, determination back in her voice. "But first, we need to survive. The ship's a wreck. We've got barely enough life support for a few more days." Lyra looked at the broken systems and the damage to the air supply. "We'll manage. We've faced worse." Voss nodded, glancing over the remnants of the Omen. Despite everything, the determination in his crew's eyes was unwavering. They would survive. They had to. "We'll find a way," he said, a fire igniting in his chest. "We'll make sure." The spiral's remnants are destroyed completely. There was no more talk of defeat, no more uncertainty. They had come this far, faced impossible odds, and now they would see it through. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. And, with that resolve, they set to work. Hours passed as they scavenged through the wreckage of the Omen, finding what resources remained. With no functional engines, no way to communicate with the outside world, and only a small amount of life support left, they were stranded in the cold, unfeeling void. But they were alive, and in the silence of space, that was something they would fight for. The stars outside the viewport looked different now, peaceful even, but Voss knew better than to believe in any peace that could be found in the aftermath of the spiral. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. "Do you think it's really over?" Lyra asked, her voice distant as she stood beside him, staring at the stars. Voss didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gazed at the stars, his mind replaying the events that had led them here. The battles, the losses, the countless sacrifices. There was so much still unknown, so much they had yet to understand about the spiral's origins. But there was one thing he knew for sure. The crew had survived. They had overcome the odds, and as long as they drew breath, they would keep fighting, no matter the cost. "It's over for now," Voss said softly, turning to face her. "But there will always be another fight, and we'll be ready." Chapter 21. Fractured horizons drifting in the void. Time elapsed, 72 hours since core destruction hull. Integrity, 15% life support, critical missed. Concentration, none. The stars beyond the viewport were stark and beautiful in their cold distance, but they were no comfort. Voss sat hunched over a damaged console, staring at the scattered data streams that flashed across the screen. Most of the ship's systems were inoperable, and they were running out of options. Their ship was a tomb now, a hollow shell of its former self. The hull was cracked in several places, and life support was hanging on by a thread. They had no engines, no way of contacting anyone. The galactic civilization they'd once known was far beyond their reach now. They were alone. They had shattered the heart of the spiral, but the consequences of that act were just beginning to unfold. Lyra's voice broke the stillness as she entered the bridge, her tone sharper than usual. "We need to find a way to patch up life support, or we won't make it another week." Voss didn't respond immediately. He ran his fingers over the ruined console, half expecting it to come alive. But it stayed dark, unyielding. "The ship's systems were slowly dying around them, I know," he finally muttered. He turned to her, his face a mask of exhaustion. "We can try jury-rigging the engines to create a basic atmosphere, but that won't last long." "Better than nothing," Lyra said with a wry smile, but her eyes were clouded with worry. She glanced around the derelict ship, her gaze taking in the skeletal remains of their surroundings. "What now, Voss? What do we do? We're stranded in the middle of nowhere, and we've already lost contact with the rest of the fleet." He didn't have an answer. For the first time since the battle in the spiral, the uncertainty pressed on him, cold and heavy. There had been so many questions left unanswered. The spiral might have fallen, but had it really been destroyed? Was there more to the entity's reach than they could even comprehend? And now, with no way to reach out to anyone, no way to know if their victory even mattered, he was left with a lingering sense of dread. "We survive," Voss said quietly, his voice raw. "That's what we do." Solari had been silent in the corner of the room, her hands folded over her chest as she studied the ship's damaged interior. She stepped forward now, her voice calm but carrying a weight of its own. "Survival is not the only question, Voss. The spiral may be gone, but there are pieces of it we don't yet understand. Remnants, echoes. We don't know what's truly left of it." His gaze flicked to her, and for a moment he saw the same worry mirrored in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "There are reports of strange phenomena," Solari continued, her tone steady but hinting at something darker. "Galaxies where the spiral's influence remains even after its supposed defeat. Systems that are still experiencing ripples from the event we caused. Things moving in the dark far beyond our reach. And we've all felt it. The presence. It's not gone. Not entirely. Lyra crossed her arms, looking out the viewport. So you're saying we've just shattered the heart of a dying beast, but the limbs are still moving? Exactly, Solari replied, her voice almost somber. The king might be dead, but that doesn't mean his influence is. Voss stood, walking toward the viewport. The cold, endless space outside seemed to mock him with its calmness. His hand gripped the edge of the console, knuckles white. So, we're supposed to go out there and hunt down every last trace of the spiral. There's no supposed to about it, Solari answered, her eyes narrowing with determination. If we don't do it, no one will. Hours turned into days as the crew worked in silence, salvaging what they could from the wreckage of the Omen. They were not alone. In their quest, though. Though the galactic authorities had lost all contact with them, there were still whispers in the far reaches of space. And those whispers were growing. Voss found an old encrypted file hidden in the archives of the ship, a transmission intercepted before they had lost all communication. It was a message from the Foundation, an organization dedicated to protecting the balance of the galaxy against unknown, unseen forces. The transmission spoke of rumors, of sightings, of unexplainable phenomena occurring in the wake of the spiral's fall. One name stood out among the list of keywords: the fractured horizon. Voss scanned the message over again. The term wasn't new to him. It was whispered among the highest echelons of the galactic military. The fractured horizon was a location, a place outside the known regions of space, where the fabric of reality itself was said to be unstable. Some believed it to be a portal, a rift left by the spiral's ancient presence. Others thought it was a place of gathering for those who had once followed the spiral, a hideout for its remnants, its broken leaders. But the most chilling theory was the one suggested in the message. The fractured horizon might be the key to understanding how the spiral had come into existence and how it might rise again. We need to find it, Voss muttered to himself, his gaze steely. Lyra entered the room, her expression hard. She had been trying to fix life support systems, but the damage was too extensive. They didn't have much time. "What's going on?" she asked, noticing the intensity in his voice. Voss turned to her, the full weight of their situation crashing down on him. The spiral wasn't just a force. It was a system, an ancient structure with influence that stretches across galaxies. If we don't stop the remnants, if we don't understand what they are, then this fight isn't over. We need to get to the fractured horizon. She didn't hesitate. We'll need to improvise, but if there's a chance that the rest of the spiral's power is concentrated there, then we're going. We have no choice. Solari walked in, overhearing the conversation. If that place exists, it could be the most dangerous thing we've ever encountered. The Omen is barely functional, our resources are spent. Voss squared his shoulders. We find a way. We've been through worse. We've survived worse. The days that followed were a blur of repairs, scavenging, and planning. Using fragments of old data, they managed to get the ship's rudimentary engines working enough to drift toward the coordinates of the fractured horizon. They had no real certainty about what they were heading into, no idea what horrors awaited them at the edge of the galaxy, or if they would even survive the journey. But one thing was clear. Their fight had only just begun. The universe had just witnessed the fall of the spiral, but the true battle was yet to be fought. The fractured horizon beckoned, a fractured, twisted place that might hold the answers, or the final doom for the galaxy. Epilogue. Echoes in the mist location. Unknown quadrant. Outer fringe of the fractured horizon. Time, classified signal. Intercept, fragmented. There is silence. Not the silence of sleep or peace, but a vast, endless kind that stretches across the gulfs of space and time. In that silence, something stirs. A ripple. A whisper. A memory that doesn't belong. Drifting at the edge of existence, the Omen floats, still battered, still broken, but not abandoned. Her hull bears the scars of war, and her systems hum with a strange new life, fed by the raw energy of the fractured horizon. The crew inside has long since passed the point of fear. What remains in them is something harder, something colder. Resolve. Voss stands alone on the observation deck, the last of the transparent panels still intact. Beyond it lies a sight that no human eyes should behold, a spiraling rift of time and dark matter coiling infinitely inward like a serpent devouring itself. The fractured horizon. There are no charts for where they are now, no names for the stars. The galaxy has forgotten them, but they are not lost. Not anymore. Lyra's voice echoes softly from the rebuilt comm array. We've isolated the signal. Again, same frequency, same rhythm, the spiral's language. It's still speaking to something out here. Voss doesn't respond at first. His eyes remain fixed on the rift where faint shapes, ships perhaps, or shadows of thought, flicker in and out of view. Then we're not done. Solari joins him in silence. Her face, once sharp with skepticism, is solemn now, transformed by purpose. We broke its spine, but its mind is still scattered across the void. And it remembers us, Voss says. That's the problem with old gods. Even in death they dream. Behind them, the Omen hums louder, powered not just by salvaged tech, but something else. A fragment of the spiral itself, captured in the moment of the king's destruction. A sliver of consciousness. Not alive, not dead. Just waiting. Some believed destroying the spiral would end the threat forever. But those who stand at the edge of the rift understand now. They didn't end it. They only woke it up. The crew has a new purpose. Not just survival. Not just revenge. They are the wardens now. The watchers at the gate. The galaxy sleeps. Safe. For a time. Blissfully unaware that its salvation lies in a ruined ghost ship hovering over the mouth of madness. As the mist begins to return, not the old spiral mist, but a new kind, laced with whispers and fragments of forgotten worlds, Voss turns from the viewport. Prep the drones, he says. Lyra answers instantly. Coordinates locked. Solari pulls up the system readout. Engine stable, for now. And as the ship groans to life, ancient hull whispering against the unnatural wind of the horizon, Voss utters the last words ever transmitted from the Omen before it vanished from known space. Let them sleep. We'll keep the watch. The signal ended there. The ship was never found. But sometimes on the edge of certain stars where radio waves die and shadows don't behave, fragments of a voice are still heard. Calling, watching, waiting, end. Ghost ship, the Spiral King.
Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Let me know in the comments what ideas you would like the next story to be about. Please leave a thumbs up, share, subscribe, comment.